Chapter 23-21, Superior Mythic. The players that had reached level 100 were astonished. My attributes are so high. And I feel so much more coordinated than before. That's not all that's changed. My senses are so much sharper and more realistic. In this state, my combat power has increased by at least 30%. Amazing. There's such a huge gap between level 99 and 100. Once I complete my Tier 3 promotion, Tier 2 experts under level 100 won't stand a chance against me. Ordinary players might not sense the changes that occurred when they reached level 100 right away, but Yan Tianxing and his companions noticed the changes immediately. They were stunned when they did. None of them had realized how great the difference was between level 99 and 100 before now. After leveling up once, their combat power had reached a whole new standard, and this was considering that most of their weapons and equipment were still level 95. If they equipped level 100 weapons and equipment, their combat power would skyrocket. Naturally, there was a major difference between level 95 and level 100 equipment. The level 100 mysterious iron items they had obtained after slaying the Dragonkin made that obvious. A level 100 mysterious iron weapon's attack power could almost rival that of a level 95 dark gold weapon, and the basic attribute bonuses were even slightly higher. It was easy to imagine how much their attack power, defense and basic attributes would rise if they fully geared themselves with level 100 fine gold weapons and equipment. Furthermore, they had yet to challenge their Tier 3 promotion quests. Now that a number of us have reached level 100 guild leader, we should start raiding level 100 team dungeons, Blackie eagerly suggested after experiencing the changes due to his new level. They hadn't even dared consider setting foot in a level 100 team dungeon previously. Dungeons monsters were far stronger than monsters in the fields after all, and without Shifeng's help, they had barely held their ground against level 100 plus field monsters before reaching level 100. Trying to raid a level 100 team dungeon would have been suicide. However, they had grown considerably stronger after leveling up, especially the players with epic weapons and equipment. These players' combat power had risen by far more than a mere 30%. Now they'd have no issues taking on a dozen or so Dragonkin warriors, even without Shifeng's help. They definitely qualified to challenge level 100 team dungeons. Not only could they test their newfound strength by successfully raiding such a dungeon, but they'd also acquire high-quality level 100 weapons and equipment. In addition, their achievement would help spread Zero Wing's fame across the eastern continent, maybe even throughout God's domain. The other level 100 players voiced their agreement with Blackie's suggestion. They were all eager to challenge a level 100 team dungeon. Don't get so excited just yet. The system's restrictions on your bodies have been lifted now that you've reached level 100, so your physical condition is slightly different. Fight the Dragonkin first and give yourselves a chance to adapt, Shifeng said, shaking his head. Smiling, he continued, if you're so eager to test your new limits, I know the perfect place for you to do that. Players' combat power would substantially increase upon reaching level 100. They could now use their 5 senses and reaction speed to its full potential, but exerting all of their strength wasn't an easy task. Even Domain Realm experts would need quite some time to adjust, not to mention Refinement Realm experts. Shifeng had only been able to adapt so quickly because he was most familiar with this body. Although there were some minor differences between his current form and the body he had used during his previous life, he had sensed and adapted to these minor changes easily as a Domain Realm expert, perfectly exhibiting his full potential. A perfect place to test our strength? Where is it, guild leader? Kola excitedly asked. Unlike the others, he carried the Titan Guard, a fragmented legendary shield. Once he reached level 100, the restrictions on his shield had also vanished. As a result, he sensed a massive boost to his combat power. Overall, he had likely improved more than anyone else on the team. A superior mythic boss's lair, Shifeng announced, gesturing to the cold spring forest central region. Every member of the team was stunned when they heard Shifeng's answer. God's domain's mythic monsters weren't equal in terms of strength. Among them, superior mythics stood at the apex of their kind, wielding even more power than mythic-ranked archaic species. Everyone here was an expert, and they all had an idea of how powerful mythic monsters would become after level 100. Trying to challenge a level 100 mythic monster before they reached Tier 3 was tantamount to throwing themselves into the jaws of death, let alone challenging a level 100 superior mythic. Relax. I'm quite confident that we will be victorious, One Shifeng assured them, chuckling at his carrot now. Take some time to adapt to your new bodies. A Tier 4 dragon was an incredibly powerful being, but he had his heavenly dragon's breath. The ring was capable of suppressing dragons to an intense degree. Including Anna and Kite's assistance, they definitely had a chance of defeating the monster. Hearing that Shifeng was confident of their victory, his teammates breathed a sigh of relief. They obediently followed their leader's orders and used the nearby dragonkin as training dummies. After around 4 hours of training, the team had a basic grasp of their unrestricted strength. Once his team was ready, Shifeng led them toward the Cold Spring Canyon. The Cold Spring Canyon was far more dangerous than the Cold Spring Forest's other areas, home to many level 103 and 104 dragonkin. Even level 105 Grand Lord ranked dragonkin commanders wandered the area. If Zero Wings members had come here before reaching level 100, they would have died the moment they aggroed a dragonkin commander. Fortunately, Kola could single-handedly tank one of these Grand Lords at level 100, preventing the dragonkin from targeting any of his comrades. Once he had a hold on the dragonkin commander's aggro, the rest of the team slowly shaved away the Grand Lord's HP, eventually killing it. When Blackie looted the dragonkin commander, he obtained the Dragontooth pendant, a level 100 fine gold necklace. Its basic attributes were more than 2 ranks higher than a level 95 dark gold necklace, and it increased the power of the wearer's dragon bloodline. Kola ended up winning the bid for the necklace, and when he equipped it, not only did it increase his basic attributes, but it also improved the purity of his dragon blood, improving his physique. Shifeng and his team finally reached the heart of the Cold Spring Canyon after another 6 hours or so of combat. He then retrieved the transfer stone he had received from the Adventurers Association and began to chant the incantation. The transfer stone transformed into violent energy that pierced an invisible barrier before Zero Wings' main force. As the barrier shattered, it revealed a paradise. Zero Wings members could hear birds chirping and smell fragrant flowers, and as they entered the space, they felt a pleasant sensation encompass their bodies. The fatigue from their long hours of grinding faded quickly as their stamina and concentration began to recover. This space was nothing like the outside world. However, before any of them had the chance to inspect this area, a horrific aura washed over them, so intense that it nearly knocked them on their backs. A dragon. Turning toward the aura's origin, their gaze rested on a 30-meter-tall infant dragon. Protected by its snow-carrot scales, the infant dragon was sound asleep. Every breath it took was powerful enough to shake the entire area. Ice Dragon Heathweight. Dragon Mythic. Level 101 HP 1,840,000, 000/184000000. When the team saw Heathweight's statistics, they had no doubt that if this infant dragon wished it, it could likely shatter this entire space, plunging it into the void. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU dragons had always been the symbol of destruction in God's domain. The various NPC cities' libraries contained a vast amount of information on these beings, always depicting dragons as natural disasters that could bring about the downfall of an entire country. If there hadn't been so few dragons in existence, they would likely have become God's domain's absolute overlords. Are we really going to raid a dragon guild leader? Kola asked, gulping as he watched the slumbering ice dragon. For a moment, Kola wondered if Shifeng were playing some kind of joke on them. Even if he were tier 3, Heathweight could likely kill him in one hit, much less now. That's right. That's what we're going to raid. Shifeng nodded after taking a deep breath. He then pulled 2 summon guard scrolls from his bag and summoned Anna and Kite. Chapter 23-22, Draconic Spell. Heathweight was a tier 4 dragon, and normally Shifeng would have tried to stay as far away from it as possible. Heathweight might merely be an infant dragon, but it still stood at the peak among tier 4 beings. It was no exaggeration to say that this dragon was invincible among tier 4 beings of the same level. Even 1,000 tier 3 players would meet their doom if they encountered a tier 4 infant dragon of the same level, let alone tier 2 players. The gap between their life ratings was simply too vast. Normally, only tier 4 heroes who had passed a trial of God and received a god's blessing would have the strength to contend with an infant dragon. However, Heathweight was under a life curse, which significantly reduced the effects of its life rating. If that weren't the case, it wouldn't have only had 1.84 billion HP and only be categorized as a monarch-ranked boss. Even a random dragon had the strength of a world boss, and a top-ranked world boss at that. Normally, defeating a true dragon without a Tier 6 god-ranked player would be impossible. Otherwise, the players that had successfully defeated a dragon of the same tier wouldn't have been regarded as legends and inspiration for countless players in God's domain. As the two summoning arrays gathered the necessary mana, the level 106 summoner Anna and the level 105 swordsman Kite emerged. During the short break Shifeng had taken after completing his Tier 3 promotion quest, Anna and Kite had completed another epic quest. As a result, their weapons and equipment had changed. Previously they had both worn epic equipment that could grow with them to level 100, but now they both had epic set equipment that would grow until they reached level 150. They had also both reached or surpassed level 105, and their basic attributes had undergone a considerable transformation. Despite the fact that Shifeng had reached Tier 3 and wore the disintegration armor, his attributes were no match for Anna's and Kite's. Once he had summoned his personal guards, Shifeng retrieved the Bible of Darkness and called forth a demon. Shifeng's Bible of Darkness was the real deal, so its power was unmatched. Moreover, as its user rose to a new tier, the Bible of Darkness would exhibit even greater strength. After a moment, a 20-meter-tall demon gate appeared before Shifeng. As the demon gate slowly opened, a Tier 4 great demon, enveloped in blue flame, stepped through. Blaze Demon. Dark Creature Great Demon. Level 116 HP 420,000, 000/420,000, 0000 Wings. Main force members gasped when they saw the Blaze Demon. They then turned to stare at Shifeng with incredulous looks. You're too vicious, guild leader. You can actually summon a great demon to do your bidding. The various superpowers would likely go crazy if they knew about this, Blackie said as he glanced at the Bible of Darkness in Shifeng's hands. Blackie had seen the Bible of Darkness before, so he knew just how powerful it was. Its ability to summon Tier 3 demons was particularly useful to Tier 2 players. A Tier 3 demon would even be useful after players reached Tier 3. Such demons had many skills and spells and were far more powerful than ordinary Tier 3 summoned creatures. However, Blackie hadn't dreamed that the Bible of Darkness could summon a Tier 4 great demon once Shifeng had reached Tier 3. This power was ridiculous. Tier 4 summoning scrolls were even rarer than epic weapons and equipment, and the various superpowers treated such items like priceless treasures, avoiding using them unless absolutely necessary. And yet, Shifeng could summon a Tier 4 great demon with the Bible of Darkness at no cost. Although a great demon had far less HP than ordinary mythic monsters of the same level, its combat power would be far greater than ordinary mythic monsters. Alright, everyone, get ready. The Blaze Demon will tank the Ice Dragon later during the raid. You guys only need to support and attack from the sidelines, Shifeng announced, chuckling as he returned the Bible of Darkness to his bag. The Spirit Emperor, Fantasy Extinguisher, had caused a sensation throughout God's domain during Shifeng's previous life due to the Bible of Darkness. With it, he had developed Fantasy Shrine from a first-rate guild into a superpower that could even suppress the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion in the Black Dragon Empire. Since Shifeng now had the real Bible of Darkness, he had even greater power. The Bible of Darkness was the very reason that Shifeng even dared to consider challenging the Cold Spring Forest's monarchs. He wouldn't have harbored the thought if he only had Anna and Kite to rely on. After all, a mythic-ranked monarch was even stronger than a Tier 4 hero. With Shifeng's command, Zero Wing's main force members went to work. Once his teammates were in position, Shifeng sent the Blaze Demon to charge at the Ice Dragon. Within seconds, the Blaze Demon was within 500 yards of Heathwaite. As the Blaze Demon approached, the Ice Dragon's eyes opened abruptly, and it woke from its slumber, turning its amber gaze on the intruder. Needing neither chants nor gestures, Heathwaite spread its jaws. With Heathwaite as the center, the Ice Dragon sucked a 300-yard radius dry of mana before a towering white beam shot toward the Blaze Demon. Tier 4 Dragon Breath. Compared to the Dragon Breath Shifeng's Black Dragon doppelganger had used, a true dragon's Dragon Breath was on an entirely different level. The Blaze Demon transformed into an ice sculpture before flying back over 500 yards. At the same time, the area around Heathwaite became a world of ice, the attack utterly transforming the terrain. Aside from Shifeng, every member of Zero Wing's team was dumbfounded. They had all heard legends and details about dragons, but they hadn't actually seen one in action. At this moment they finally understood what a dragon truly was. If they hadn't stood over 1,000 yards away, that dragon breath attack would have killed every one of them. Fortunately, the Blaze Demon had initiated the raid. Even so, the Blaze Demon had lost over 20 million HP after taking a direct hit from Heathwaite's dragon breath. All of you snap out of it. Once you get close to the boss, make sure that you're spread out. Healers, throw everything you have at the Blaze Demon. Shifeng barked. He couldn't help his sigh of relief as he watched the Blaze Demon break free from its icy prison, appearing mostly intact. If that dragon breath had heavily injured the Blaze Demon, this raid would be over. Neither Anna nor Kite could tank the Ice Dragon, and their combat power couldn't even compare to the level 116 Blaze Demons. They'd either die instantly or be heavily injured if they took a direct hit from a Tier 4 dragon breath. The Blaze Demon ran at Heathwaite again. Fortunately, Dragon Breath had a relatively long cooldown, and because of that the Ice Dragon switched to using its claws to attack the incoming demon. The Blaze Demon proved to be no match for Heathwaite. Each time it blocked an attack it lost over 8 million HP. Although the Blaze Demon launched a counterattack from time to time, its Tier 4 spells only dealt a few million damage. The two creatures' strengths were on completely different levels. Shifeng only activated Miniature World and Ring of Brilliance to suppress the Ice Dragon and enhance his allies' combat power once the Blaze Demon had secured Heathwaite's aggro. Unfortunately, Miniature World was barely effective against the Infant Dragon. However, Heavenly Dragon's Breath's Dragon Domination was fully effective, reducing the dragon's basic attributes by 20%. Once Heathwaite's basic attributes had been suppressed, Zero Wings healers were barely able to keep up with the damage the Ice Dragon dealt to the Blaze Demon. Shifeng also used Life Domain to restore the Blaze Demon's HP to full on occasion. For a time, the Ice Dragon was helpless against the Summoned Demon, during which Heathwaite's HP continued to decrease under Zero Wings bombardment. 95%, 90%, 85%. However, Heathwaite was not an easy opponent, and it turned its dragon breath on a random target from time to time. The players who had failed to dodge the attack had become ice sculptures, losing all of their HP in the blink of an eye. Dragon Breath had even slain Turtledove, despite her active life-saving skill. As Heathwaite's HP continued to fall, the intervals between each dragon breath grew shorter. By the time Heathwaite's HP reached 30%, only a little over half of the team remained standing. Despicable ants. I'll burn you to ash. Heathwaite bellowed before chanting an incantation. A threefold magic array with a 500-yard radius then appeared above the Ice Dragon, plundering all of the mana within a 1,000-yard radius. Tier 4 Draconic spell Meteorite Fall. Suddenly, a colossal meteorite which blocked out the sun, descended from the magic array, growing larger as it emerged. When Zero Wings survivors saw this, they began to despair. A Tier 4 Draconic spell. Even Shifeng's expression darkened at the unexpected sight. How is this possible? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Draconic spells were some of the most primitive spells in God's domain, beginning at Tier 4. Even dragons rarely possessed Draconic spells of the same tier. Meanwhile, a Draconic spell was even more powerful than a large-scale destruction spell, capable of rivaling the gods' divine arts. A single blow from such a spell could annihilate tens of thousands of creatures. Not even invulnerability spells could stop their devastation. Anna, summon the Valkyrie. Shifeng shouted. Not even he had a countermeasure for a Tier 4 Draconic spell. Anna's Valkyrie was his only hope. Anna immediately began to chant her angel summoning incantation. Chapter 23:23, Valkyrie vs. Dragon. Anna finished the angel summoning incantation in 2 seconds. And the moment she did, a gigantic magic array appeared above her, no smaller than Heathwaite's meteorite fall. A Valkyrie with 3 sets of pure white wings then emerged, landing before Anna. A Tier 4 higher Valkyrie? When he saw the upgraded version, Shifeng was stunned. Angel summoning was Anna's legacy skill, and Shifeng had always treated it as his final trump card since the skill allowed Anna to summon a Valkyrie that was 2 tiers higher than her. When Anna had been a Tier 2 personal guard, she had been able to summon a Tier 4 Valkyrie. Now that Anna had reached Tier 3, she should logically be able to summon a Tier 5 Valkyrie. With such a powerful ally, Zero Wings' remaining team should have no problem suppressing a Tier 4 infant dragon. However, Anna's Valkyrie was still only tier 4. The only difference between the previous Valkyrie and this one was the extra set of wings. Angels' wings represented their status. An angel with 3 sets of wings was considered a higher Ankh, with 4 sets were considered archangels. In terms of life rating, archangels rivaled dragons while higher angels were slightly weaker. But before Shifeng had any time to ponder the matter, the meteorite above them had nearly completed. Block it. Shifeng couldn't care less about the Valkyrie's status at the moment. He immediately commanded Anna to send her Valkyrie to stop Heathwaite's meteorite fall. The higher Valkyrie began to chant an incantation as soon as Shifeng gave the command. The higher Valkyrie's incantation was unique. Rather than draw mana from her environment, it drew on a primitive form of mana from the void. In less than a second, a dazzling golden spear of thunder manifested in the Valkyrie's hands. An origin spell. Shifeng was ecstatic to see the spear of thunder form from the void's mana in the Valkyrie's hands. Origin spells were the most primitive form of magic in God's domain. They were the root of all spells, capable of rivaling divine arts. However, humanity had lost track of origin spells due to repeated wars between the gods. Shifeng had never expected the higher Valkyrie to use such magic. Before Shifeng could get over his excitement, the giant meteorite, so large that it covered the sky and so heavy that it shattered space around it, began to descend. It looked as if Armageddon had begun for a moment, and Zero Wings members fell further into despair. As the meteorite began to fall, the higher Valkyrie finished her incantation. She then threw her spear at the meteorite. Soundlessly, the thunder spear transformed into a streak of golden light as it struck the incoming meteorite. Boom! The moment the two attacks met, the impact caused a powerful explosion. The resulting shockwave was so powerful that it nearly lifted the players below off their feet. The gigantic meteorite disintegrated into countless, smaller meteors that rained down, creating craters as they struck the ground. Every meteorite was nearly as powerful as a Tier 4 large-scale destruction spell. Zero Wings members gaped as they watched the stones slam into the ground. Tier 2 and 3 players were little more than ants in a battle of this scale. If this battle had taken place in a city, rather than in this special space, the spell's residual effects alone would be more than enough to level half the city. After blocking Heathwaite's meteorite fall, the higher Valkyrie shifted her attention to the ice dragon itself. She formed another spear of golden electricity in her hands before vanishing. By the time Zero Wings players realized where she had gone, the Valkyrie had appeared before Heathwaite. Tier 4 Superior Instantaneous Movement. Not only did Superior Instantaneous Movement have more range than the normal spell, but there was also almost no delay between the caster's disappearance and reappearance. Moreover, the spell didn't affect the ambient mana, making it impossible for enemies to determine the caster's destination. When she appeared before Heathwaite, the higher Valkyrie thrust her spear at the ice dragon. The attack was so fast that not even Shifeng would have enough time to react. If that attack struck him, he'd die instantly. However, Heathwaite was a dragon and reacted instantly, countering the golden spear with a rage-filled claw strike. Boom! The impact of the collision created a deafening boom that echoed throughout the area. Surprisingly, the Valkyrie's strength was too much for Heathwaite, and the infant dragon stumbled 2 steps backward. After suffering this humiliating blow, Heathwaite turned a wrathful glare on Shifeng. Heavenly Dragon's breath suppression on dragons was simply too powerful, and the passive ability had plundered 20% of Heathwaite's basic attributes. Heathwaite already suffered a life curse, so its strength was slightly lower to each the higher Valkyries. Now Dragon's domination affected it as well. It was no match for the summoned angel. Good. Everyone attack with everything you've got. Shifeng quickly shouted when he realized that Heathwaite was thoroughly suppressed. He had originally planned to use angel summoning only after Heathwaite had gone berserk, but he had been forced to use it early due to meteorite fall. Although Anna had risen to Tier 3, which strengthened her angel summoning, its duration had only increased from 10 seconds to 15 seconds. Unfortunately, Heathwaite still had nearly 30% of its HP remaining, and 15 seconds wouldn't be enough to kill it. Attack! Yan Tianqing shouted. Yan Tianqing realized the predicament they were in as well. He immediately activated his berserk skill and his trump card, Shadow Stink, a Tier 2 taboo skill. In a frenzy, Yan Tianxing transformed into 3 streams of fog, attacking the ice dragon and dealing over -70,000 damage with each hit. Occasionally the fog streams landed a critical hit, dealing over -150,000 damage. The rest of Zero Wings survivors activated their trump cards as well, with the weaker players dealing around -50,000 damage, while the stronger members of the team such as Zhao Yueru, dealing upwards of -200,000 damage. Zhao Yueru's critical hits even dealt over -500,000 damage to the ice dragon. Her Tier 3 fire-type spells were a massive advantage in this raid. However, Shifeng's DPS was undoubtedly the highest. After activating Heavenly Dragon's power, his strength could even surpass an ordinary mythic monster's, and as a result he dealt over -1 million damage, even without fire-type skills or spells. When he used Void Slash, he instantly devoured over 10 million of Heathwaite's HP. With the higher Valkyrie, Anna, Kite and the Blaze Demon attacking as well, Heathwaite's HP rapidly decreased. 25%, 20%, 15%. The higher Valkyrie continued to suppress Heathwaite after the dragon had gone berserk. However, she didn't deal quite as much damage. When Heathwaite's HP dropped below 10%, the higher Valkyrie's duration ended and she vanished. "Humans, you're dead." Heathwaite bellowed as the higher Valkyrie disappeared. The ice dragon swiped its tail at the Blaze Demon and Anna's Holy Knight, sending both of them flying. It then swiped a claw at Anna, ignoring the Blaze Demon completely. The ice dragon intended to rid itself of the most troublesome opponents before dealing with the remaining pests. Even without her army of summoned creatures, Anna's DPS was exceptionally high. With her summoned creatures, she was the infant dragon's most challenging opponent. Although Anna's spells could overwhelm ordinary mythic monsters, they were utterly useless against the berserk Heathwaite. "Don't think you can take out our main DPS so easily." Suddenly, Shifeng appeared before Anna and activated his disintegration power, swinging Killing Ray at Heathwaite's incoming claw. The moment Shifeng activated disintegration power, it cancelled out Heavenly Dragon's power. In return, however, the ability temporarily elevated Shifeng to Tier 4. Not only did he now wield Tier 4 strength, but his physique, reaction speed and skills had risen as well. Boom. When the attacks collided, Shifeng stumbled 3 steps backward due to the impact, losing more than 50,000 HP. He was still at a disadvantage, but he had successfully blocked Heathwaite's berserk attack. When that attack had failed, Heathwaite responded with another claw strike. This time, however, the ice dragon activated a skill in the process. Tier 4 skill Sky Splitter. 5 razor-sharp claws flew toward Anna from different directions, each with more power than the previous claw strike. As soon as Shifeng steadied himself, he executed Lightning Flash to counter the attacks. Executing the secret technique proved far easier after his forceful upgrade to Tier 4, and he sent 17 sword lights at the approaching claws. A series of explosions blew apart the ground around Shifeng, but even after all 5 attacks he had only stumbled back 3 steps. He also only lost around 200,000 HP. Even at Tier 3, Shifeng had over 1,700,000 HP, far less than he currently had. Losing 200,000 HP was nothing life-threatening. After watching Shifeng pin down the ice dragon, his teammates breathed a sigh of relief and continued their frenzied assault against Heathwaite. Time passed quickly. As the battle progressed, Heathwaite's attacks grew stronger, but with the Blaze Dragon and the Holy Knight's help, Shifeng kept the ice dragon in check, preventing it from harming Anna or Kite. However, the team suffered the occasional casualty when Heathwaite fired its dragon breath. 5%, 4%, 3%. When disintegration power's duration ended, Shifeng followed it up by activating Power of Darkness and Blade Awakening, relying on his twofold Berserk's effects to tank Heathwaite's attacks. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. When less than 5 seconds of Shifeng's twofold Berserk remained, Heathwaite's HP had fallen below 7 million. Meanwhile, fewer than 30 players were still standing, and the surviving healers could no longer keep up with the Ice Dragon's damage output. Die. Shifeng activated Divine Providence and swung Killing Ray for a final blow. Lightning Slash. A massive lightning bolt sliced through Heathwaite's neck, leaving a deep gash across its throat. That lightning bolt also destroyed the last of the infant dragon's HP. Chapter 23-24, Ice Dragon's loot. Everyone's experience bars exploded with EXP as Heathwaite's colossal body crashed to the ground. A level 100 plus mythic boss would already provide a lot of EXP, and as a monarch-ranked boss, Heathwaite would award even more. In the end, the 24 or so survivors watched as their experience bars rose beyond 90%. Although they had only reached level 100 less than a day ago, they were almost at level 101. Shifeng was now at 63% of level 101 as well. The EXP from the Ice Dragon alone was worth nearly 3 days of normal grinding. It's finally dead. And I thought we were finished, Blackie said, sighing deeply as he plopped down on the ground. He was ecstatic that they had finally won. Near the end of the raid, Heathwaite's defense and attack speed had steadily increased. At one point, Shifeng hadn't even been able to pin down the Ice Dragon with the Blaze Demon and Holy Knight's help. Moreover, Heathwaite's battle recovery generated over 10 million HP every 5 seconds, and as a result, they had barely moved the Infant Dragon's HP bar toward the raid's end. Yan Tianxing and the others felt like survivors of some great disaster. None of them wanted to imagine how the raid would have gone without Shifeng's Bible of Darkness and 2 personal guards. When Heathwaite had died, it had dropped over 100 items beside its corpse, forming a small mountain that radiated waves of intense pressure. It's so powerful. This is the first time I've ever seen items that emitted such intense pressure. I wonder what kind of items dropped. Maybe there's a legendary item. Everyone stared at the mountain of loot with glowing eyes, and when they heard mention of a legendary item, the eager light in their gazes grew even brighter. They all forgot about their exhaustion for a moment, wanting to charge forth and inspect the dropped items. The strongest known item at this stage of the game was Fragmented Legendary rank, which everyone assumed Shifeng possessed. However, Zero Wing's main force members knew the truth. There was more than one Fragmented Legendary item. Naturally, this was a guild secret. Exposing this truth would only invite God's domain's various powers to target Zero Wing, and only an expert of Shifeng's caliber could openly own a Fragmented Legendary item without having to fear for his life. If anyone else were in his position, they wouldn't even dare to set foot outside of an NPC city. Epic items couldn't even compare to the benefits a Fragmented Legendary item provided, much less a true legendary item. Based on what players had learned from the game's libraries, every legendary item in the game had the strength to decimate heaven and earth. With such an item, players would have the power to transcend tiers. Before their fight with Heathwaite, these players wouldn't have been so concerned about such a power, convinced that they could bridge the gap between tiers with high enough basic attributes. But now they understood what that kind of strength truly meant. Without the strength to transcend tiers, Tier 3 players had no hope of contending with superior mythic bosses. Alright, let's resurrect our fallen. Shifeng simply chuckled when he saw the hunger in everyone's eyes. He found their assumptions hilarious. Obtaining a legendary item with so little effort was impossible, and after level 100 weapons and equipment drop rates decreased considerably. On average, even mythic bosses' loot would consist of fine gold weapons and equipment. One would have to be incredibly lucky to acquire dark gold weapons or equipment from a mythic boss. However, Shifeng had to admit that he was surprised by how much Heathwaite had dropped. This was the first time he had felt such an incredible pressure from a boss's loot as well. Having received their orders, the surviving team members pushed aside their curiosity for the moment and began to resurrect their teammates. Fortunately, a monarch boss's lair was similar to the space within dungeons. Even if players died here, they'd only lose 10% of their EXP, and only 5% if a healer revived them. Thus, the level 100 players that had fallen hadn't dropped back to level 99. While his companions revived, Shifeng organized the Infant Dragon's loot. Amazing. Is this a benefit for the first kill? Shifeng was stunned as he examined the items. His only aim in killing Heathwaite was to complete his crusade quest and become Cold Spring Canyon's lord. He hadn't expected to gain much from the raid itself, yet he was elated that he had chosen this monarch boss to raid. The Ice Dragon had dropped a total of 121 items, which was normal for a monarch. However, the item's quality far exceeded Shifeng's expectations. There were as many as 24 inferior legendary materials among the loot, all necessary for producing epic and fragmented legendary items. Even without a design for such items, these materials could increase one's production success rates when crafting level 100 dark gold items. Level 100 plus dark gold items were incredibly rare in God's domain, only slightly more common than epic items under level 100. They'd still be rare even after Master Lifestyle players gained the ability to craft level 100 plus dark gold items. The required materials for producing such items were incredibly precious. They only dropped from powerful bosses, and each boss dropped very few at a time. Moreover, the production success rate for level 100 plus dark gold items was very low. Advanced Master Lifestyle players would only have a theoretical success rate of 35%. Every player that focused on their subclass knew that theoretical success rates were nowhere near the actual success rates. It was merely the highest possible success rate players could achieve. In practice, a minor deviation in the process could reduce the success rate to 20% or 30%. If one included an inferior legendary material in the process, however, their production success rate with level 100 plus dark gold items would increase by at least 5%. With these 24 materials, Zero Wing could produce a dozen or so level 100 plus dark gold items. Surprising Shifeng further, Heathwaite had also dropped legendary materials. The Ice Dragon's Claw. Countless Grandmaster Forgers dreamed of obtaining this item. Dragons were one of the rarest types of monsters in God's domain, and they were immensely formidable. Acquiring a dragon's claw was nearly impossible. When used to forge weapons, dragon's claws were godly materials. As long as the player made some minor modifications to the claw, they could easily produce an epic weapon, even without an appropriate design. If they had an epic weapon design, they could craft a fragmented legendary weapon by using a dragon claw as the base material. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Any dragon claw that had appeared on the market during Shifeng's previous life had easily fetched the price of 2 fragmented legendary items in an auction. After all, one could sacrifice 2 random fragmented legendary items to secure a weapon of the same rank that was more compatible with its wielder. And Heathwaite had actually dropped 2 ice dragon's claws. Why wouldn't Shifeng be excited? It was no wonder why the Ice Dragon's loot had radiated such an incredible pressure. Aside from materials, Heathwaite had dropped 5 Dragon's Blood vials that could boost Cola and Alluring Summer's dragon bloodlines, further strengthening their Dragonslayer classes. While Shifeng appraised the several designs the infant dragon had dropped, one result left him utterly dumbfounded. How is this possible? A flying ship design. Chapter 23-25. Crimson Dragon Flying Ship. Shifeng fell silent for a long time as he stared at the tattered design in his hands. No matter how he thought about it, he couldn't believe that Heathwaite had dropped a flying ship design. Flying mounts were incredibly rare in God's domain, and even with a common flying mount, one would have endless bragging rights. Even the weakest flying mount was rarer and more precious than a level 100 plus epic weapon. Flying ships, on the other hand, were even more amazing. The most ordinary flying ship's movement speed could rival an extraordinary flying mount, and one could accommodate up to 100 people at a time. Their aerial combat abilities were even at the peak of Tier 3. However, the main continent's various countries had monopolized the technology for flying ships, and players typically had no way to get their hands on one. At best, players could rent an airship which could only transport goods and people from one of the kingdoms or empires. One would be dreaming if they thought to rent a flying ship, an aerial weapon of mass destruction. Shifeng had never even heard of anyone obtaining a flying ship design by killing a boss. If players wanted to acquire a flying ship design, they'd have to raid a major NPC power's main headquarters or steal one from one of the NPC kingdoms or empires. Of course, both methods were exceedingly dangerous. There was a safer method. Players could create one themselves. The subclass requirements for creating a flying ship, however, were immensely demanding, and players would have to invest a lot of effort and time into the research. As for the cost of creating one from scratch, even superpowers would have a hard time justifying such a massive expense. Most superpowers would rather purchase a completed flying ship. Purchasing a flying ship was much easier than purchasing a flying ship design. A guild could do so through the black market or by earning a sufficiently high status in an NPC country. Regardless of which method a player or power relied on, the price would be exorbitant. Furthermore, players could only purchase a very limited number of flying ships. As far as Shifeng knew, the easiest way to buy a flying ship was to become a duke in a kingdom. As a duke, a player could purchase one flying ship for 80,000 gold. To acquire more, they'd have to try their luck in the black market. Unfortunately, the black market only accepted ancient gold, not regular gold. And yet, Shifeng had just obtained a flying ship design after killing Heathwaite. If the various powers of his previous life had known this, they would have slaughtered every ice dragon in God's domain. Unable to contain his excitement any longer, Shifeng clicked on the design to inspect its statistics. He wanted to know what rank this flying ship design was. Crimson Dragon Flying Ship Design can be used to construct a common flying ship with a maximum capacity of 100 people and peak Tier 3 combat power. The Crimson Dragon flying ship carries 8 magic cannons and 1 magic crystal cannon. Piloting the flying ship requires a minimum of 6 people. Producing the flying ship requires 1,000 Titan Silver, 10,000 Void Iron, 2,000 Mana Stones, and 100 Magic Elven Stones. Sure enough, it is the most common type. Shifeng inwardly sighed when he saw the statistics. If he had obtained a bronze flying ship design, he could have ruled over the entire Cold Spring Forest without any issues. Bronze flying ships had Tier 4 combat power after all and would be a massive threat to Tier 3 players. Not even Shifeng would escape from a bronze flying ship's all-out assault with his life. A flying ship wasn't a monster. It did not have the mobility flying monsters possessed, and it didn't have monsters' vast repertoire of skills and spells. The so-called Tier 4 combat power didn't mean that the flying ship's overall combat power was limited to Tier 4. Rather, each of the flying ship's attacks had peak Tier 4 power. With over a dozen cannons, a flying ship's bombardment could even blow a Tier 4 Apex expert to smithereens. Without a Tier 4 legendary flying mount or something even more powerful, they'd have to flee the moment they spotted a bronze flying ship. After giving the matter some thought, Shifeng realized that he was being too greedy. Superpowers struggled just to obtain a single common flying ship, let alone a bronze flying ship. 1,000 Titan Silver and 100 Magic Elven Stones. The production cost is vicious. The Crimson Dragon flying ship's necessary materials astonished Shifeng. Titan Silver was a rare byproduct that could be obtained from mining fine Titan Oregon. Thus far, Zero Wing had only compiled a little over 2,000 Titan Silver ingots. Magic Elven Stone was even rarer and more valuable. One could only obtain the super rare or from grade 2 or veins. It was just slightly more common than 7 Luminaries crystals. Including the other materials, producing the Crimson Dragon flying ship would cost roughly 50,000 gold, several times more than the bronze-ranked Guardian Puppet's production cost. However, it was still cheaper than trying to become a duke. Moreover, he would get more value for his money. A common flying ship would be far more useful to players than bronze combat puppets. Even though a common flying ship's combat power was only at the peak of Tier 3, it could transport 100 players, allowing them to travel across the continent freely. Moreover, players could rest and recover while on a flying ship, which they couldn't do while riding a flying mount. The recovery ability wasn't very powerful, but it was a precious asset when exploring level 100+ neutral maps. Moreover, players would be able to flee when they encountered mythic-ranked flying monsters thanks to the flying ship's defensive capabilities. Did the boss drop something good, guild leader? Blackie asked, curious about the joyful expression on Shifeng's face. Here, take a look for yourselves, Shifeng said, chuckling. Aside from the flying ship design, he shared the loot's information in the team chat. Crap. Legendary materials. And that's a design for a level 100 secret silver equipment. This fine gold-ranked polar ice set is amazing. When they saw the boss's loot, every member of the team was excited. Heathwaite might not have dropped an epic item, but these players weren't fools. They knew how precious inferior legendary and legendary materials were. These were all top-tier materials that could be used to produce epic items. Moreover, the Ice Dragon had dropped 7 pieces of level 100 dark gold equipment and over 30 level 100 fine gold weapons and equipment pieces. These weapons and equipment would grant many of the team members a massive boost to their combat power. The polar ice set Heathwaite had dropped was particularly eye-catching. It might only be a 6-piece level 100 fine gold set equipment, but its attributes were nearly 3 ranks stronger than that of level 95 dark gold equipment. With this set, a level 100 elementalist could easily defeat lower-level experts in full epic equipment. Following which, Shifeng held an internal auction, and Yi Luofei claimed the polar ice set. Now only Shifeng, Kola, and Zhao Yueru, who had at least one fragmented legendary item and multiple pieces of epic equipment, had higher basic attributes than she did. Once the weapons and equipment had been distributed, Shifeng returned to White River City with his team. Since Zero Wing's main force members had finally reached level 100 or higher, they qualified to challenge their Tier 3 promotion quests. Naturally, he couldn't continue to help them level up in the Cold Spring Forest, and more than a dozen of the team members were ready to challenge their promotion quests now. Wasting time would be a pity. Players would only become true powerhouses in God's domain once they reached Tier 3 after all. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Yu Shifeng spent some time advising his players on how to complete their Tier 3 promotion quests before he dismissed them. Those that weren't strong enough yet left to prepare a bit more, and the players that were strong enough headed to the Adventurers Association immediately. Meanwhile, Shifeng headed toward White River City's Adventurers Association for another matter. Within one of the Adventurers Association's second-floor VIP reception rooms. Lord Bronze Legatee, how may I be of service? The female elven administrator asked as she entered the room. I wish to turn in my crusade quest for Cold Spring Forest's ice dragon Heathwaite, Shifeng announced as he retrieved a colossal silvery white dragon horn and placed it on the table between them. This dragon horn was proof that he had slain Heathwaite. As soon as Shifeng proved that he had completed his crusade quest, the sounds of a series of system notifications reached his ears. Chapter 23-26, 1 Star-Lord System. You have completed the crusade quest for the ice dragon Heathwaite. Rewarding Lord's Token, level +1, Star Moon Kingdom reputation +300, guild popularity +10,000 system. Congratulations. You are the first player to become a lord in God's domain. Rewarding Lord popularity +100. System. Congratulations. For acquiring 100 Lord popularity points, you have been promoted to a 1-star lord. The system notification repeated 3 times while Shifeng rose to level 102. The system promoted me to a 1-star lord just for being the first player to become one? Shifeng couldn't believe his eyes as he stared at the system notifications. The concept of a lord was still likely foreign to most players, not to mention lord popularity. When players became a lord in God's domain, they'd gain the ability to recruit NPCs to form their own knight division. However, the process was similar to searching for personal guards, so it had its challenges. Furthermore, a knight division had 5,000 slots. It was easy to imagine how difficult it would be to fill these slots with high-quality NPCs. The only method to ease the process was to increase one's lord popularity. The higher a lord's popularity was in God's domain, the easier it would be to persuade and recruit NPCs with high growth potential. Unfortunately, increasing one's lord popularity was incredibly difficult, only possible by completing special quests. Moreover, one would only gain a handful of popularity points with each quest. Accumulating 100 lord popularity normally required a lot of time and effort. Meanwhile, every 100-point increment was a turning point. The first 100 points would elevate one to a 1-star lord, at which point players wouldn't have to run around NPC cities in search of appropriate NPCs. They could simply start a draft through the Adventurers Association. These drafted NPCs might not be uniformly powerful, but there would be quite a few with high growth potential. If one were lucky enough, they might even recruit a secret silver guard. Of course, with more lord popularity, the standard of their drafted NPCs would increase. The problem of increasing his lord popularity to 100 points had troubled Shifeng. Without a solution, he'd have to spend several months finding capable NPCs to fill his 5,000 knight slots. Fortunately, God's domain solved that problem for him. Administrator Lorraine, I wish to draft members for my knight division through the association, Shifeng declared as he showed the Lord's token to the elven administrator. Very well. However, the fee will depend on the scale of the draft you wish to implement. Generally, a draft in a town costs 10 gold per week, 100 gold per week in a city, 300 gold per week in a kingdom's capital, and 1,000 gold per week in an imperial capital. Where would you like to implement your draft? Lorraine asked. How expensive? It's no wonder why the Adventurers Association is the 4th wealthiest power in God's domain. Shifeng was speechless after hearing the prices. Second- and third-rate guilds had no hope of obtaining a lord's position in the past. The various superpowers and top-ranked first-rate guilds had monopolized this benefit. Hence, Shifeng hadn't actually known how much it would cost to implement a draft. He certainly hadn't expected it to cost this much to form a knight division. The results of a draft depended on one's luck. NPCs would not simply respond to a draft because the Adventurers Association had issued it. According to Shifeng's calculations, he would need to implement a draft in several hundred cities to recruit 5,000 knights with relatively high growth potential in a short time. I'd like to implement the draft in these countries' cities, Shifeng decided. After giving the matter some thought, he felt it would be best to recruit from cities in flourishing kingdoms and empires. In the end, he paid 44,500 gold to implement his draft in more than 400 cities. It was a large enough expenditure to put a first-rate guild's finances in the red. God's Domains guilds were pushing their experts to reach level 100 right now, and as a result, it was only natural that their expenses would rise. Fortunately, Zero Wing had the Candlelight trading firm and multiple guild towns and cities to generate income. The guild earned just as much profit as an ordinary superpower. However, Zero Wing still needed to support its main headquarters in the real world and the Heaven's Rumble training center. The guild wasn't particularly wealthy at the moment. It seems I'll have to find ways to increase the guild's profits. With how much Zero Wing has right now, financing 5,000 knights is impossible. After paying for the drafting fee, Shifeng mentally calculated how much he'd need to spend on his future knight division. A 5,000-man knight division would definitely be an amazing asset, but it would be expensive to maintain. Unlike the NPC soldiers one could recruit to defend guild towns and cities, knights weren't affiliated with a kingdom or empire. Rather, they were considered a lord's personal combat power. Hence, players would not receive subsidies from a kingdom or empire, relying on their own funds to pay their knight salaries. Affording a knight division wasn't easy, and to make matters worse, each knight's salary would depend on the NPC's growth potential. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. To hire and nurture a bronze-ranked Tier 2 knight, one would have to spend 50 gold per week. Multiplied by 5,000, a division of bronze, Tier 2 knights would cost 250,000 gold per week. Moreover, this cost didn't include the price of weapons and equipment for these knights. For a moment, Shifeng couldn't help but admire the first-rate guilds that had ruled their own territories in the past. Once he had taken care of the draft order, Shifeng left the Adventurers Association and made his way to the Candlelight trading firm. He intended to start the Crimson Dragon flying ships production immediately. After reaching level 100, the various powers would prioritize their aerial development. Whoever controlled the sky would become an overlord in God's domain. Level 100+ maps were very far from civilization after all, and the ability to travel through the sky would give players a huge advantage when grinding for resources. Moreover, this advantage would become more prominent as time passed. If he wanted to bolster Zero Wing's development, he had to arm the guild with flying ships. Chapter 23-27, Producing a Flying Ship. White River City, Candlelight Trading Firm. The special room, which was the size of a basketball court, contained various piles of rare materials. Any ordinary player would likely go into a frenzy trying to claim them all if they saw this room. These materials were easily worth more than 15,000 gold altogether, and even though the value of coins had significantly depreciated by this stage of the game, that was still an astronomical amount of money to ordinary players. Converted into credits, it would be enough for the average citizen to live out the rest of their lives without worry about food or shelter. Here are the last of the materials you requested, Guild Leader, Melancholic Smile said as she handed 100 magic elven stones to Shifeng. Shifeng had basically asked for everything the Candlelight firm had in stock of the rare materials he needed, particularly the Titan Silver and Magic Elven Stone. These were rare drops, even from the Flame Demon's Valleys attributed or vain. No other guild could likely fulfill Shifeng's demand for 100 magic elven stones. Good. Shifeng nodded approvingly after inspecting the materials in the room. He then continued in a serious tone, I'll need you to help me with something later, but you must keep it an absolute secret. I can't tell anyone? Melancholic Smile was a little confused. The Candlelight trading firm rigorously screened any potential members before they were recruited. Moreover, all core members were required to sign a series of strict contracts, ensuring the smallest chance possible that the firm's technology and methods leaked. Sharing such technology required one to transfer designs. Without the correct design, It didn't matter if a player knew how to produce an item. Now, however, Shifeng forbade her from even mentioning their discussion. It was a bit unusual. "You'll understand soon," Shifeng said. He then carefully pulled the Crimson Dragon flying ship design from his bag and placed it on the stone table before him. Melancholic Smile didn't think much of the design initially. She had seen plenty of precious and rare designs and recipes in her line of work. She had grown numb to such surprises. However, when she realized what this design booklet depicted, she froze in shock. Flying ship. Melancholic Smile could not believe her eyes. As a lifestyle player and the Candlelight trading firm's manager, she could only dream of crafting an airship, which was only a method of transportation, let alone a flying ship. Countless lifestyle players dreamed of creating flying ships, especially after seeing airships fly from one city to another. However, they assumed that would remain a dream. Players had absolutely no access to designs for airships and flying ships due to the various kingdoms and empires' heavy restrictions regarding their flying technology. Creating one would require an immense amount of knowledge and skill, not to mention a ton of materials for the necessary experiments. And yet Shifeng had just dropped a flying ship design on the table between them. It was at this moment that Melancholic Smile, more or less, realized why Shifeng had forbidden her from speaking of this to anyone. Although the trading firm had restrictions in place that prevented members from sharing trade secrets, those restrictions were only effective in the game. Candlelight couldn't stop these players from running their mouths off in the real world, and if news that Zero Wing had obtained a flying ship design went public, the consequences would be unimaginable. The various powers already hungered for their own airships. On the other hand, flying ships were capable of transportation and aerial combat. Needless to say, the various powers' desire for flying ships was even greater, nearly maddening. If the various powers learned that Zero Wing had a flying ship design, they'd do anything they could to take it, and if they couldn't, they'd ensure that Zero Wing didn't keep it. Acquiring a flying ship wasn't easy, but with the design, one could create as many flying ships as they wanted. After a certain point, flying ships would be significantly more useful than combat puppets in battle. Players had ways to deal with combat puppets after all, but none of them knew how to deal with a flying ship. Hence, the various powers would do whatever necessary to ensure that Zero Wing failed to develop, and they'd strike while they still had an opportunity. "That's right, it's a flying ship. I intend to produce one, but I can't handle the task alone. Aside from forgers, I'll need a large number of engineers and alchemists," Shifeng said. "To protect this secret, however, I'll need you to split these players into multiple groups and assign them various parts to work on. I'll handle the final assembly." "We're going to make one now?" The very idea began to make Melancholic Smile nervous. "Guild leader, just the core engine is so complex that I'm not even sure an advanced master forger can handle it. If we fail, all of this magic elven stone will be useless. Why don't we wait a little while longer?" If it were only an issue of money, Zero Wing could handle it, but these magic elven stones were incredibly rare. Collecting more wasn't simply an issue of money. If they failed in producing the flying ship's engine, they would have to wait for a very long time before they'd have enough elven magic stone to attempt it again. "I wish it could wait too, but Zero Wing can't afford that," Shifeng explained, flashing her a bitter smile. The various major powers were desperately leveling up, and many of them have already begun to explore level 100 neutral maps. The Shadowless Empire's members had made that clear. Once they secured a foothold in level 100 neutral maps, the various superpowers would finally be able to exhibit their true strength. Zero Wing didn't have support from any major corporations. Thus, it couldn't afford to continuously recruit large numbers of experts, especially refinement realm and above experts, rapidly expanding. Zero Wing would have to nurture such experts on its own. There was simply no comparison between the various superpowers and their guild. Obtaining more resources and ensuring it had time to develop was the only way Zero Wing could secure its position in God's domain. That was the only way the guild would survive the intense struggle between the various superpowers in level 100+ neutral maps. Now that Zero Wing had its own territory and had begun to draft NPCs for a knight division, the guild needed more funds and resources to arm its knights. Maintaining a proper knight division with Zero Wing's current income was impossible. Unfortunately, it had become considerably more difficult to earn profits and resources from other worlds now that the planar passages had opened. That left Zero Wing with only one method to increase its income: transportation of goods. The industry would be particularly profitable when it came to moving non-bag space items. Shifeng had intended to produce intermediate traps to earn more funding, but it was too soon to introduce these items to the public. Most of the various large guilds' main forces hadn't begun exploring level 100 neutral maps yet, and demand for intermediate traps would be limited. Furthermore, Zero Wing's members would need these traps as well. Without at least 100 intermediate trap designs, it would be very difficult for Candlelight to produce enough intermediate traps for Zero Wing's purposes and to earn substantial profits. However, transportation methods were a different story, especially when it came to flying ships. Even a common flying ship could carry up to 500 non-bag space items, far more than any sailboat. In addition, flying ships' movement speed was much higher than sailboats. If Zero Wing resold non-bag space materials, it would make a killing. This was why the various superpowers had gone crazy for airships and flying ships during Shifeng's previous life. I understand. I'll copy the design for these parts and split them between multiple groups. I'll ensure that no one has any idea that we're making a flying ship, Melancholic Smile promised, nodding. She then began to examine the flying ship's design and plan accordingly. It shouldn't be very difficult to hide what they were doing. Some of the flying ship's parts were similar to those in ordinary ship designs. Most of the parts that were different would require forgers. As long as Shifeng crafted those parts himself, they shouldn't have any issues keeping this a secret. Melancholic Smile then left to distribute the construction materials and designs among the Candlelight's master lifestyle players. None of these players suspected a thing when they received their orders. This wasn't a usual process after all, especially after Zero Wing had recently begun to craft bronze speedboats. Meanwhile, Shifeng turned his full attention to forging the flying ship's engine. After producing the Guardian puppets and Hell tanks, he was quite familiar with engine production. The Crimson Dragon flying ship's engine was simply a more complex version. Sure enough, this is beyond an ordinary advanced master forger. As Shifeng examined the engine's design, he could feel a headache begin to brew. Fortunately, his forging standard wasn't a problem. With the Philosopher's Hand, he could elevate himself into an advanced master forger, so he met the engine's minimum requirements. However, the magic array that he needed to inscribe on the engine would be a challenge. It was so complex that it nearly required a master magician to complete. However, Shifeng did not panic. Instead, he calmly and slowly researched the engine's magic array and repeatedly attempted to draw it. After over a dozen hours of practice, Shifeng had finally learned how to draw the magic array successfully and barely finish it in one go. Good. Let's make the engine now. Shifeng took a short break before he focused on producing the engine. The engine's production process wasn't simple, and Shifeng had decided to use a dragon blood crystal, a top-tier inferior legendary material Heathwaite had dropped, to increase his success rate. Crystallized dragon power. The dragon blood crystal was the size of a fist and contained energy that was nearly as pure as that in 7 luminaries crystals. Not only could one use a dragon blood crystal as a power core for a city's defensive magic array, but it could also reinforce magic arrays. It was easily as valuable a level 100 plus epic weapon. Unfortunately, Heathwaite had only dropped 1 dragon blood crystal. Shifeng had considered saving it to strengthen one of his city's magic arrays, but after giving the matter some thought, he decided to use it to increase his production success rate. A flying ship would be an immeasurable asset after all. Time passed quickly and the engine slowly took shape. Although others would have struggled to temper the materials, it was quite easy for Shifeng with the help of the Soul Flame. It saved Shifeng plenty of time and concentration. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Shifeng finally finished the engine's body after 6 hours of restless work. As the engine took shape, the special forging room's mana surged toward it. Sensing the change, Shifeng began to engrave the magic array immediately. Whether or not the production process was a success would largely depend on the engraved magic array at the end. Not only did the array have to be completed within a short time, but it also had to be completed in one move. Shifeng couldn't afford to pause during the process. This was the only way the engine's mana would be able to flow smoothly. A single minor deviation would waste all of his efforts thus far. 1 minute. 3 minutes. 5 minutes. As the mana flowing into the engine began to thin, Shifeng engraved the array faster. His concentrated rapidly depleted as if he were executing lightning flash with every second that passed. Just as the mana flow was about to cut off, Shifeng finished the last connection, completing the magic array. Chapter 23-28 Advanced Flying Ship. Did it succeed? As a storm of mana enveloped the engine, Shifeng began to grow nervous. The engine was the most difficult part of the flying ship to produce, but once it was complete, the remaining parts would be fairly easy to craft. The most troublesome aspect of the remaining parts was how much manpower they required to produce. Fortunately, with Candlelight's strength, the trading firm had the manpower to simultaneously construct the parts of 3 flying ships, let alone 1. The magic array engraved in the engine began to glow as the mana calmed down, actively gathering the mana into the engine. The engine consumed so much mana that the density in the room increased. Wonderful. It's a success. As Shifeng watched, his expression shifted to one of elation. This wasn't the first time he'd forged an engine, and if it had failed, he knew the stream of mana flowing into it would have been unstable. Now that this was done, he was practically guaranteed to produce a Crimson Dragon flying ship. Moreover, he hadn't expected the mana density in the room to rise to such an extent. The flying ship's engine drew in at least 3 times more than the bronze combat puppet's engine. An engine was the very heart of a machine and played a major role in determining the machine's strength. Following which, Shifeng tapped on the engine to appraise it. System: Bronze flying ship engine has been forged successfully. Forging proficiency increased by 1,000 points. Obtained 40 million EXP. The dragon blood crystal's effects are so powerful? Shifeng stared at the results with wide, bloodshot eyes. He had already been relieved that the production process had been a success, but he hadn't expected the dragon blood crystal to upgrade the engine's rank from common to bronze. Normally, bronze engines only powered bronze flying ships. An engine like this would definitely increase a common flying ship's rank. After all, common and bronze-ranked flying ships required roughly the same quality of materials. Their engines were the main factor that made a difference. Shifeng immediately notified Melancholic Smile to hasten the remaining parts' construction. After more than 20 hours, Candlelight's master lifestyle players finally produced all of the Crimson Dragon flying ship's various parts. However, Shifeng didn't start the assembly process when Melancholic had delivered them. Rather, he used the 7 Luminaries Ring's spatial gate to transport Melancholic Smile and himself to an open field within the White River City region. A flying ship was massive, much larger than a sailboat. The special forging room just didn't have enough space. Hence, Shifeng needed an open location for the final assembly. Of course, to protect this guild secret, he decided to construct the flying ship in an empty, open plain. There was an extremely large number of parts to a flying ship. Normally, if a player tried to assemble one themselves, they'd need at least 2 days to complete the task. However, Shifeng and Melancholic Smile had already become intermediate master forgers, saving a lot of time with their skills. With Shifeng's soul flame in particular, he could assemble and weld parts together quite quickly. After the 2 players worked for a dozen or so hours, they had finally completed the Crimson Dragon flying ship. They marveled at the 60-meter-long, 20-meter-tall mechanical ship with a crimson hull before them. So, this is a flying ship? Despite taking part in the assembly process, Melancholic Smile couldn't believe her eyes. Even from far away, the Crimson Dragon flying ship was a shocking sight to behold. Next to its colossal frame, even an extraordinary flying mount looked like an infant. Shifeng sighed ruefully as he gazed at the vessel. Crimson Dragon flying ship. Advanced flying ship. Maximum capacity. 130 people. Durability 5,000/5,000. Possesses Tier 3 upper rank defensive capabilities. Item storage when liberated. 20,000 bag space slots and 800 non-bag space slots. Additional active skill 1 magic shield. Absorbs up to 50 million damage for 10 minutes. Cooldown 15 minutes. Additional active skill 2 mana pulse cannon. 4,000 yard range. Deals tier 4 damage to a radius of 50 yards. Cooldown 45 seconds. 8 cannons are currently equipped. Up to 12 cannons can be equipped. Additional active skill 2 magic elven cannon. 5,000 yard range. Deals tier 4 peak rank divine damage to a radius of 200 yards. Cooldown 5 minutes. Additional active skill 4 mana field. Disrupts the flow of mana within a 2,000 yard radius, weakening all incoming magic damage from Tier 3 spells or below by 30% for 5 minutes. Cooldown: 20 minutes. Each activation costs 300 magic crystals. The Bronze Engine Shurfeng had elevated the Crimson Dragon flying ship to advanced rank. Now this flying ship was even faster than extraordinary flying mounts, and its cannons and defenses had increased by a rank as well. This Crimson Dragon flying ship could even contend with level 100 plus mythic monsters. If his guild had had an advanced flying ship like this in the past, his and Shadow's development would have been massively different. Even if Shadow hadn't been able to contend with a superpower, it would have had enough strength to instill fear in first-rate guilds. Tier 4 experts would have dared mess with the guild. If Dragonheart Island's superpowers find out that we have this Crimson Dragon flying ship, they'll die from envy, Melancholic Smile said, astonished as she inspected the flying ship's statistics. She had forged hell tanks, so she understood how powerful this Crimson Dragon flying ship was. Aside from its cannon's frightening power, its Tier 3 upper-rank hull was enough to render any attack below Tier 4 powerless. Without a mythic combatant, the various superpowers would have no hope of damaging the flying ship. Even if they launched Tier 4 attacks, it would take ages for them to get past the flying ship's 5,000 durability. Envious? I'm more afraid that they'll go mad when they see it, Shurfeng said, chuckling. Melancholic Smile was a lifestyle player, not a combat power. She didn't truly understand what it meant to have a flying ship that could stand against mythic monsters. Players would be able to reach most places in God's domain with a flying ship like this. They wouldn't have to worry about the limitations flying mounts faced or attacks from powerful flying monsters. This vessel would give players a tremendous advantage when grinding for levels or transporting non-bag space items, which were becoming more valuable nowadays. Non-bag space items were becoming useful for more than just producing war weapons, buildings, and ships. Now, such items could even be used to craft players' weapons and equipment, especially level 100 plus secret silver and above weapons and equipment. This was also why these weapons and equipment pieces were so valuable. It's a pity that the flying ship's production requires so many materials. Even if we focused everything on collecting materials, it would still take a week or so before we'd have enough for a second flying ship. We'd have to get really lucky to collect enough for a third, Melancholic Smile surmised, sounding disappointed. If they could produce a fleet of flying ships now, no one would be able to get in Zero Wing's way in God's domain. Unfortunately, the Crimson Dragon flying ship required too many rare and precious materials, some of which were non-bag space items and particularly tedious to transport. If the Candlelight trading firm's main headquarters hadn't had such a large stockpile of these materials, they wouldn't have been able to construct the first flying ship so quickly. Just keep collecting the materials. Every flying ship we make right now counts, Shurfeng said. As soon as Shurfeng finished giving Melancholic Smile her next duties, he received a message notification. The sender was none other than Sindhart, Immortal Light's guild leader. When he read the message, Shurfeng frowned. Guild leader, has something happened? Melancholic Smile asked, noticing that Shurfeng's mood had soured after receiving that message. Immortal Light has been working with the Freedom Alliance in Sea's End, and it seems that there's been some trouble that's preventing Immortal Light from transporting materials out of the area, Shurfeng said. The Freedom Alliance has invited its allied guilds to send representatives for a meeting, and Sindhart is hoping that we'll send one to investigate the situation. Immortal Light was the naval guild that Zero Wing secretly controlled in the Apocalypse Empire. It had been relying on Immortal Light to secure its naval resources, especially those from Sea's End. The area was home to many materials that were imperative to producing ships and level 90+ dark gold weapons and equipment. If Immortal Light couldn't secure resources from Sea's End, Zero Wing would suffer, which was why Sindhart had requested a representative from Zero Wing to resolve the matter. I think it's best if I go myself. These materials are important for Candlelight's merchandise. If we lose access to these materials, Candlelight's income will plummet, Melancholic Smile suggested. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You don't worry about it. I'll go. Right now, you need to focus on collecting the materials we need to construct the Crimson Dragon flying ships, Shurfeng said, shaking his head. The Crimson Dragon flying ship was crucial to Zero Wing's survival. Without it, the guild wouldn't be able to exert dominance in the Cold Spring Canyon. Relying on a 5,000-man night division wouldn't be enough. Not only was a flying ship faster than flying mounts, but it also had the combat power to squash Tier 3 experts like ants. Meanwhile, Shifeng wasn't as skilled as Melancholic Smile when it came to collecting materials. After all, she had long since grown familiar with the Candlelight trading firm and its connections. "I'll do that then," Melancholic Smile answered, nodding. As Zero Wings Guild leader, Shifeng would naturally be a stronger representative. Moreover, she didn't have the energy to manage the material collection while addressing the issues in Sea's End. Melancholic then used a return scroll to teleport back to White River City, while Shifeng stored the Crimson Dragon flying ship in his epic spatial bag and made his way toward the Apocalypse Empire. Chapter 23-29, Times Have Changed. Apocalypse Empire, Blue Bay City. After teleporting to Apocalypse City, Shifeng continued toward Blue Bay City, one of the Empire's port cities. Although Blue Bay City wasn't a particularly large NPC city, its player traffic was intense. Shifeng saw an endless stream of players entering and leaving the city's teleportation hall. Moreover, many of these players wore exquisite clothing and the 2-star merchant's insignia. Some even had the 3-star insignia. The merchant's insignia was proof of a merchant player's ability. The higher a merchant player's star rank was, the greater their ability. Normally, 3-star merchant players were supported by a large guild, and they possessed significant resources and sales connections. Hence, they were known as great merchants and were even rare in imperial capitals. And yet, Shifeng encountered quite a few great merchants in Blue Bay City. Based on the bland reactions to these merchant players, their presence in the city didn't seem to be unusual. So many great merchants gathered in Blue Bay City because it was a trading port. Countless players came into port each day with resources from the various neutral powers out at sea, which allowed the merchant players in the area to earn huge profits. This city's development speed is amazing. I doubt it'll be long before Blue Bay City is promoted to a large-scale city and gains a Tier 4 NPC magistrate manager. As he watched the various horse and transport carriages rolling down the streets, Shifeng had to admit that Sindheart had impressed him. When Sindheart had wanted to move Immortal Light to a new city, Shifeng had suggested that he develop near the sea. The various first-rate guilds hadn't been paying much attention to the ocean at that time after all. By relying on the few resources Zero Wing had provided, Sindheart had established Immortal Light in one of the Apocalypse Empire's port towns, eventually expanding the guild to occupy all of Blue Bay City. Now Blue Bay City was almost ready for its promotion into a large-scale NPC city, and Immortal Light's naval prowess had grown powerful enough that the guild didn't need to fear first-rate guilds. Sindheart's management was even more impressive than Gentle Snow or Aqua Rose's. Not only would Blue Bay City grow larger once it became a large-scale NPC city, but the conveniences it offered would also improve. The city would have no trouble accommodating a large number of players, and Immortal Light would even qualify to contend with the Apocalypse Empire's first-rate guilds. As Shifeng left the teleportation hall, he headed toward a nearby advanced restaurant. A level 96 man approached him as he arrived. The Elementalist wore 5 pieces of epic equipment, and the weakest piece on him was level 95 Dark Gold rank. 2 more level 96 players followed the Elementalist, one of which was a cleric while the other was a berserker. Both wore 3 pieces of epic equipment. Seeing these 3 greet Shifeng, the rest of the players in the restaurant were surprised. Who is that guy? Immortal Light's guild leader and 2 of its great experts are actually welcoming him. Could he be some big shot? Every player in Blue Bay City knew of Immortal Light's guild leader, Sindheart, as well as the 2 great experts that accompanied him. To secure control of the city, Immortal Light had challenged and defeated many of the large guilds that had occupied Blue Bay City. It had even sunk a first-rate guild's fleet, which had spread its fame across the Apocalypse Empire. Moreover, Sindheart was even one of the top 10 elementalists in the Empire. Even first-rate guilds' guild leaders treated him with respect. Yet now, Sindheart had been waiting to greet an ordinary-looking player. Why wouldn't this surprise them? Hearing the hushed discussions around him, Sindheart had Immortal Light's members clear out the restaurant. The spectators obediently stopped talking and scattered. "I hadn't expected you to make the trip here, Brother Yifeng. With you we'll stand a much better chance in Sea's End," Sindheart said as he greeted Shifeng. "Brother Sindheart, you jest. May I know what happened with the Freedom Alliance? Why is it calling in its allies for a meeting?" Shifeng asked, getting straight to the point. I've just received some information regarding the situation. Let's head inside to continue our conversation, Sindhart insisted, his expression becoming disheartened at the mention of the Freedom Alliance. He led Shifeng into the advanced restaurant he had fully reserved earlier. As Shifeng and Sindhart entered the restaurant, the cleric and berserker gave each other disgruntled looks behind Shifeng's back. This guy doesn't think much of our guild, does he? He started demanding answers as soon as the boss walked up to him. Our boss is too mild-tempered. If I were in his position, I would have given this guy a piece of my mind. I don't want him thinking that Immortal Light is the same small guild it had been in the past. Forget it. He'll see how powerful Immortal Light has become once we get to Sea's End. The two experts weren't pleased with Shifeng's behavior. Immortal Light might have received a lot of resources from Zero Wing and shared half of its shares with the guild, but Immortal Light had changed. Now it was only slightly weaker than the Empire's first-rate guilds, and on the water, it was even stronger than some of them. Not only was Sindhart Immortal Light's guild leader, but he was also an extraordinary expert who had successfully repelled the Peak Experts King's return had sent. Even superpowers were wary of his strength at sea, yet Shifeng treated the man so casually. Once they had taken their seats in the restaurant, Sindhart filled Shifeng in on the details regarding the Freedom Alliance's recent actions. A new power had joined the Freedom Alliance, and now the Alliance had 12 major fleets, not 11. This new power was exceptionally powerful. It had started out as the last-ranked 12th fleet, but it had soon taken the top position in the Freedom Alliance. This had significantly changed the status quo in the Freedom Alliance. The Alliance had only controlled 3 of the major cities in Sea's End, but now it controlled 5. Naturally, this had caused a qualitative improvement regarding its resource income. Normally, this development would be a good thing, but the newly minted First Fleet wanted to reorganize the Freedom Alliance's partnerships with the various powers, including disqualifying some of them. Hence, the Alliance had invited the various powers to visit Starfall Island for this meeting. Starfall Island was a particularly dangerous location in Sea's End. Ordinary ships wouldn't make it into the sea zone, torn apart by the area's powerful sea monsters. One could only get through with a sufficiently strong fleet. A new power has joined the Freedom Alliance? Realization dawned upon Shifeng when he heard Sindhart's explanation. A commotion had occurred in the Freedom Alliance during Shifeng's previous life, but Silent Entropy, the original First Fleet's commander, had eventually suppressed it. Unfortunately, Silent Entropy and his fleet had suffered a massive setback thanks to Shifeng, which must have prevented him from controlling the situation. This resulted in a new power taking over the Freedom Alliance. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Since the Freedom Alliance has grown stronger, they want to see whether their partners still qualify to participate in their alliance. While I can understand its reasoning, I had never thought something like this would happen so suddenly, Sindhart said, smiling bitterly. I've recalled all of Immortal Light's best ships, but it'll probably be another 3 or 4 hours before they return. If we wait until then to leave, we'll likely be a little late to the Freedom Alliance's meeting. They would need a small fleet of bronze speedboats just to get to Starfall Island. Without sufficient strength, they'd only find death waiting for them. How many bronze speedboats and stronger have you gathered so far, Brother Hart? Shifeng asked. We currently have 8 bronze speedboats and 1 mysterious iron speedboat ready to depart, Sindhart said, shaking his head. It won't be enough to make it to Starfall Island. We'll need at least 20 bronze speedboats and a sailboat. 8 bronze speedboats and 1 mysterious iron speedboat? That'll be enough. We should set out right away, Shifeng declared. Chapter 2330, Mysterious Iron Sailboat. They're enough? Sindhart gave Shifeng a confused look. Normally, a small fleet of 8 bronze speedboats and a mysterious iron speedboat would be a formidable force, but they needed to reach Starfall Island. Starfall Island served as a transit point for players who wanted to explore level 100+ sea zones. Every sea monster near the island was level 95 or higher, and their population density was terrifying. One could even encounter mythic-ranked king-class sea monsters in the area. Without a sufficiently powerful fleet, their journey to Starfall Island would be a one-way trip. I've brought a sailboat with me. With it, we should have enough combat power. Shifeng tried to reassure Sindhart when he saw the man's worried expression. He then took out the crystalline bottle housing the Storm sailboat from his bag. A mysterious iron sailboat? Sindhart's eyes nearly fell out of their sockets when he saw the storm sailboat. Sindhart had long since known that Zero Wing possessed superb naval power. The guild had both the secret silver-ranked Swift Dragon speedboat and bronzed-ranked One-Horn sailboat after all. Even now there were only two known secret silver speedboats throughout the Apocalypse Empire: Pantheons and Zero Wings. Although a secret silver speedboat was only one rank higher than a mysterious iron speedboat, the difference between the two boats' combat power was like the difference between heaven and earth. Not even an ordinary sailboat was a match for a secret silver speedboat. When Phoenix Rain had secured her position on Thunder Island, Zero Wing's Swift Dragon speedboat had been a large part of the reason for her success. Moreover, the Freedom Alliance's passing monarch had relied on the Swift Dragon and One-Horn speedboats to secure the best territories the Freedom Alliance occupied. Although passing monarch hadn't been able to claim his as the Alliance's first fleet, he had secured the second rank enough authority that his word in the Freedom Alliance was only second to Silent Entropies, the original First Fleet's commander. Passing monarch had also become the reason that Immortal Light had been able to continue developing in the Apocalypse Empire. Sindhart had never dreamed that Zero Wing would have an even stronger ship. Reaching Starfall Island shouldn't be much of a problem with this storm sailboat, but it's getting pretty late. We should head out, Shifeng said as he stored the repaired storm sailboat. This is wonderful. We'll have a much better chance of securing our position now. Sindhart exclaimed, brimming with confidence. Setting aside Zero Wing's strength as a pseudo-superpower and the relationship between passing monarch and Shifeng, the storm sailboat would be more than enough to ensure Immortal Light retains its position as one of the Freedom Alliance's partners. In fact, it might even help improve relations between Immortal Light and the Freedom Alliance. Sindhart gathered his men immediately, and they teleported to Sea's End's Blue Jade City with Shifeng. Once they arrived, they'd set sail towards Starfall Island's sea zone. Sea's End, Starfall Island. As a transit hub for players traveling to level 100+ sea zones, the island wasn't very populated right now. However, due to the Freedom Alliance's invitation, any power that wanted to remain a member of the Alliance had no choice but to brave the dangerous journey to the island. As a result, a large number of speedboats and sailboats filled Starfall Island's port. The weakest speedboat at the dock was bronze rank and quite a few of them were mysterious iron rank. Even naval superpowers would be stunned by the grand sight. I wonder what stunt the Freedom Alliance is trying to pull this time. They called us all the way out here. It's likely that they're trying to determine whether or not we're strong enough to get this far. Ordinary powers have no hope of reaching this sea zone. We lost a considerable amount of durability just from the fights with the sea monsters on the way here. That's right. I came with a fleet of 20 bronze speedboats and one sailboat. If my fleet had been any weaker, I wouldn't have made it here. As the various powers' representatives discussed their journey to Starfall Island, they couldn't help but frown. They all had questions regarding the Freedom Alliance's invitation to such a dangerous place, and none of them knew what the Alliance intended. They could not figure out what the Freedom Alliance was trying to do. It should be known that the Freedom Alliance was a giant in Sea's End, and any power it allied itself with was formidable at sea. Otherwise, they couldn't guarantee the cargo's safety as they transported it across the sea, earning a stable income of resources and coins. I wonder how the Freedom Alliance intends to choose which partnerships it will maintain? The Alliance is nearly as powerful as the House of Seas and controls 5 of Sea's End's major cities. Even naval superpowers in other locations are afraid of the Freedom Alliance at this point. I assume they'll base their decisions on each power's strength and connections. Take Immortal Light for example. As a second-rate guild, it doesn't qualify to partner with the Freedom Alliance, but because of its close relationship with Passing Monarch, the Third Fleet's commander, it can collect resources that not even first-rate guilds like ours can reach. Indeed, Immortal Light should be responsible for as much as 10% of the Freedom Alliance's resources. Even naval superpowers are envious. However, based on my information, Zero Wing stands behind Immortal Light. The guild is a large part of the reason that Passing Monarch had risen to his current position. It is only natural that Immortal Light has been assigned better resources than other powers. As the various representatives chatted about Immortal Light, envy flashed in their eyes. There were over 30 powers cooperating with the Freedom Alliance, yet Immortal Light claimed 10% of the Freedom Alliance's resources. Immortal Light's luck will run out soon. I'm sure the Freedom Alliance intends to redistribute its resources during this meeting, and not even Silent Entropy has as much authority in the Alliance as he used to, much less passing Monarch. I agree. Based on what insider information I've received, not only has the Freedom Alliance invited major powers like ours to this meeting, but it's also invited Giant's Heart from the Sea God's realm. Giant's Heart? You mean the guild that stole the Flare Fortress from the Pride Empire in the Fire Dragon Empire? The very same. Is there another Giant's Heart I don't know about? When the various representatives heard mention of Giant's Heart, their expressions darkened. They had never thought the superpower from the Sea God's realm would try to claim a piece of the pie. Ordinary players might not have heard of Giant's Heart, but the various major powers that paid constant attention to the shifts of power within God's domain would be quite familiar with the name by now. The superpower had successfully stolen a fortress from the Pride Empire, a super guild. With that move, Giant's Heart had proven that it was powerful enough to shake the various superpowers on the main continent. If Giant's Heart intervened in the Freedom Alliance's matters, it was almost certain to claim a large fraction of the Alliance's resources. Meanwhile, while the various major powers' representatives conversed, another fleet approached Starfall Island. Once they noticed the fleet, these representatives gaped, shocked. This fleet consisted of 60+ bronze speedboats, 11 mysterious iron speedboats and 5 sailboats, 2 of which were bronze rank. This fleet was easily several times stronger than the various powers, and every ship bore the Giant's Heart Guild emblem on its sails. As these ships docked, over 1,000 players disembarked. Every one of these players was level 96 or above, with many at level 97. The weakest piece of equipment on these players was level 95 fine gold rank, and over a dozen of them wore level 95 fine gold set equipment. As for the several players leading the group wore a minimum of 5 pieces of epic equipment. As these players walked through the port, the various major powers members unconsciously stepped aside to open a path. Amazing. Too amazing. So this is Giant's Heart? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Even if Zero Wing makes a personal appearance, Immortal Light will get nothing but the Freedom Alliance's scraps. These representatives couldn't help but admire the strength of Giant's Heart's fleet and members. Shortly after Giant's Heart's fleet docked, more ships appeared on the horizon. A sailboat, which was much larger than bronze sailboats and required 3 mainsails, led this small fleet. A faint layer of mana enveloped the entire sailboat. What is that? That sailboat is actually protected by a magic barrier. Wait. That's a mysterious iron sailboat. Chapter 2331. Times have changed. When someone had mentioned a mysterious iron sailboat, silence descended on the port as everyone stared intently at the approaching fleet. A mysterious iron sailboat? Impossible. To small guilds and adventurer teams, sailboats were unattainable treasures, but that wasn't the case for the major powers on Starfall Island. Ordinary sailboats were nothing special, and bronze sailboats at most would earn a surprised glance. For major powers, it was only a matter of time before they had their own bronze sailboats. Many of them already had clues and information that would lead to bronze sailboats, and as long as they had the strength and were willing to put in the time and resources to follow these clues, it wouldn't be difficult to secure a bronze sailboat. Otherwise, so many powers wouldn't have acquired their own by now. However, mysterious iron-ranked sailboats were an entirely different story. Not one power had found a single clue pertaining to mysterious iron sailboats' locations, much less acquired one. Although there was only one rank between a mysterious iron sailboat and a bronze sailboat, the difference between the two boats' strength was like the difference between heaven and earth. A bronze sailboat had slightly stronger defense and firepower than an ordinary sailboat, but at mysterious iron rank, its defense would undergo a qualitative transformation. At that point, a sailboat could block Great Lord-ranked sea monsters' attacks without losing any durability. As players explored higher-level sea zones, they'd encounter Great Lord-ranked sea monsters more frequently. Coming across 2 or 3 Great Lords at a time might not be an issue, but even a bronze sailboat would lose some durability during a fight with 5 or 6 Great Lords. Without multiple ships, long journeys at sea would be impossible, as would exploring dangerous sea zones. Crap. It really is a mysterious iron sailboat. A mysterious iron sailboat. Our guild could practically move unhindered through a level 100 sea zone if we had one of those. Amazing. Whose fleet is that? They actually sent a mysterious iron sailboat to lead it. The various major powers couldn't help their shock and curiosity as they watched the gradually approaching storm sailboat. Aside from the up-and-coming superpower Giant's Heart, they hadn't expected another power with the ability to field a mysterious iron sailboat to participate in this meeting on Starfall Island. The storm sailboat glided to a stop by one of the port's docks while the representatives quietly chatted amongst themselves. As Immortal Light's members stepped onto the dock, many players quickly recognized Sindhart. His arrival caused an instant sensation at the port. Sindhart, that mysterious iron sailboat belongs to Immortal Light? Impossible. How can a guild like Immortal Light have a mysterious iron sailboat? Our guild has thoroughly investigated Immortal Light. That guild doesn't even have a bronze sailboat, much less a mysterious iron sailboat. The various major powers that had cooperated with the Freedom Alliance for a while knew more or less details about their competitors, especially the powers that were on friendly terms with the Freedom Alliance's upper echelons. Since Immortal Light received 10% of the Freedom Alliance's resources, the other powers had paid particularly close attention to the guild. Thus, all of these representatives knew how powerful Immortal Light was as a guild. However, none of them knew how to rationalize the storm sailboat they saw before them. No, that's not it. I don't see Immortal Light's guild emblem on the sailboat. It wasn't long before one of the players noticed something amiss. Moreover, the person beside Sindhart looks like Zero Wings Yifeng. The declaration inspired everyone to take a closer look at the player accompanying Immortal Heart's guild leader. It's true. That's Zero Wings Yifeng. If that's the case, then the storm sailboat must be Zero Wings. Zero Wing is stronger than even the rumors have made it out to be. It actually possesses a mysterious iron sailboat. It seems Immortal Light has come prepared. So what if Immortal Light has Zero Wing's support? Strength is everything on the ocean and Zero Wing is only a pseudo-superpower on land. How could it possibly contend with naval guilds like ours? The various representatives sneered at Shi Feng and Immortal Light's members. The status quo wasn't the same as it had been at sea. In the past, a powerful ship had been a significant asset to a power. After all, the various naval powers barely had enough ships to form a full fleet back then. However, even third-rate powers had their own fleets by now, not to mention first-rate powers. So, that's the rumored Zero Wing? I hadn't expected it to have a mysterious iron sailboat as well. It's no wonder why it dared to provoke war blood on Dragonheart Island. A tall, handsome man some distance away from the port stated. The man wore Giant's Heart's guild emblem, and a hint of interest flashed in his eyes when he saw the storm sailboat. A mysterious iron sailboat is quite powerful, but unfortunately, it'll at most offer some convenience when grinding sea monsters. A single mysterious iron sailboat isn't enough to affect the power struggle at sea, a blue-haired woman added indifferently. Moreover, Zero Wing has provoked Starlink, which Old Undying has nurtured. Its future is quite bleak. Although Zero Wing's storm sailboat had indeed caused quite a commotion at Starfall Island's port, it was only a minor interlude to the Freedom Alliance's announcement regarding how it would redistribute its resources among its partners. Following which, the Freedom Alliance's members guided the various representatives to a reception room in the Freedom Alliance's residence on Starfall Island. Once everyone had arrived, the Freedom Alliance's 12 commanders entered and took their seats on the stage at the front of the room. These expert standards had clearly improved since the last time Shi Feng had attended one of the Freedom Alliance's meetings. This was especially true for the First Fleet's representatives, who sat in the center of the stage. Although the First Fleet had only sent 2 representatives, both were apex experts. The middle-aged man, the First Fleet's commander, was particularly powerful. The First Fleet's commander only looked to be around 40, but Shi Feng could sense a wild energy deep within the man. He felt like a veteran mercenary that had seen countless battlefields before. He was also a level 97 berserker. A young man with short hair stood behind the commander. The assassin youth radiated a chilling aura, and even Sindhart, who sat quite a distance away, felt an intense pressure from this youth. These 2 people alone would be more than enough to give the various superpowers a huge headache. It was no wonder why Silent Entropy, Passing Monarch, and the Freedom Alliance's other commanders had been overtaken. Since everyone's here, I'd like to begin with discussing our resource redistribution. Flame Robber, the First Fleet's commander, said as he swept his gaze over the gathered players. The resources under the Freedom Alliance's control have changed and more powers have begun to target us. Hence, we have decided to re-examine our current partner's strength to ensure the safety of our future benefits. The method we will use to determine your strength is simple. We have stored some precious, non-bag space materials on Starfall Island, and we'd like you to deliver these materials to the Chaos Sea's Ghost City. As long as you arrive safely with the materials, you will pass the test. The various representatives' expressions twisted when they heard Flame Robber's announcement. Even Sindhart's expression turned dark. God's domain's dark forces ruled over the Chaos Sea, and the players in the area were lunatics who only thought of slaughter. Dark players in the Chaos Sea were particularly powerful. Some of them could even control sea monsters, using them as tools for transportation and combat. In the Chaos Sea, even an expert fleet would suffer tremendously, and some would simply be annihilated. Most of the various superpowers tried to avoid the sea zone at all costs. If Immortal Light, a guild that was barely considered a first-rate power on land, tried to sail through the Chaos Sea, it was almost guaranteed that the journey would be a one-way trip. Flame Robber must have lost his mind. Big Sis leaves. He actually set up such a brutal test. If we agree to this, we'll lose over 80% of our partners, including many of his own supporters. What is he thinking? A level 96 female cleric asked from her seat with the 4th Fleet's members. As far as she was concerned, Flame Robber's decision might weaken the other fleet's influence in the Freedom Alliance, but it would also weaken First Fleet's. No, he hasn't gone mad. I'm afraid that Passing Monarch will get hit the hardest with this decision. 100 Leaves, the 4th Fleet's current commander, said as she watched Passing Monarch, who wore a similarly ugly expression. At the same time, she couldn't help but applaud Flame Robber's determination. Passing Monarch's fleet consists of independent adventurer teams, none of which have any background or support from major corporations. Passing Monarch has gone to great lengths to strengthen Immortal Light as his supporter, but after this redistribution he'll lose the guild. If that's the case, Passing Monarch might also lose his position among the top 5 fleets in the Freedom Alliance during the next resource competition. While most of the Freedom Alliance's fleet commanders celebrated Passing Monarch's misfortune, the tall, handsome man from Giant's Heart, who sat with the other representatives, shifted his gaze toward Shifeng. What a pity. I had hoped I would get to see the power of a mysterious iron sailboat, but it seems that won't be the case, the handsome man said, sighing. I told you that a single ship means nothing at sea, the blue-haired woman said, rolling her eyes. Let's get moving. Once the sun sets, the Chaos Sea will become far more dangerous. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The handsome man fell silent and followed his companion out of the reception room. The other first-rate powers began to move as well. They might not be a match for the various naval superpowers and wouldn't survive a direct clash with the Chaos Sea's dark players, but if they were careful and lucky they could pass this test. Brother Yifeng, it seems this trip has been a waste of your time. I hadn't expected the Freedom Alliance to set up such a vicious test. However, I still intend to try. The Chaos Sea is the Dark Forces territory, but with how vast it is, I might be able to avoid dark players if I'm lucky, Sindhart said, gritting his teeth. The Freedom Alliance's resources were too important for Immortal Light to give up. He had to take this risk and try to pass the test. You don't need to take everything on yourself, Brother Hart. Zero Wing is Immortal Light's major shareholder, and this matter involves resources that my guild requires. Naturally, Zero Wing will participate as well, Shifeng declared, shaking his head. He then glanced at Flame Robber, who had stood and was about to leave the room. Flame Robber had certainly played his cards well. Unfortunately, he had chosen the wrong opponent. Chapter 2332, Steel Giant. I'll have to trouble you then, Brother Yifeng, Sindhart said. He felt both grateful and ashamed when Shifeng had offered to help. Zero Wing's help was a large part of the reason that Immortal Light had acquired its current strength. Sindhart had thought that with Immortal Light's development, it could return the favor more or less, but it seemed that the guild needed to rely on Zero Wing once again. However, Immortal Light's fleet would have a greater chance of reaching Ghost City with Zero Wing's storm sailboat. Sindhart then began to make the necessary arrangements for Immortal Light's remaining bronze speedboats and sailboat to meet him at Starfall Island for a final struggle. If Immortal Light could secure the Freedom Alliance's resources, it would qualify as a first-rate naval power. It might even become an overlord in the Apocalypse Empire. After all, the Freedom Alliance controlled 5 major cities in Sea's End, with more than double the resources it used to have. Moreover, it would likely acquire more as time passed. Naturally, Immortal Light could reap more benefits from its partnership with the Freedom Alliance as well. While Sind Heart mobilized Immortal Light's experts, the other major powers began to do the same. After just 8 hours, sailboats and speedboats crowded Starfall Island's port. The spectacular scene stupefied the adventurer teams and guilds that rested on the island. More than 30 expert fleets had docked, and the weakest ship among them was a bronze speedboat. Moreover, the weakest fleet had a minimum of 30 bronze speedboats and 3 sailboats. If these fleets cooperated, they could even take on level 90+ mythic ranked sea monsters. Of all of the fleets present, the most eye-catching was undoubtedly Giant's Heart's. Giant's Heart's fleet consisted of 100 bronze speedboats, over 20 mysterious iron speedboats and 10 sailboats. Of the 10 sailboats, 4 were bronze rank. Not even the Freedom Alliance's first fleet had such combat power, yet this wasn't all that Giant's Heart possessed. Giant's Heart is terrifyingly powerful. It's no wonder why it defeated Pride Empire in the Fire Dragon Empire. 100 Leaves, who watched the ships gather from one of Starfall Town's lookout towers, commented as she inspected Giant's Heart's fleet. Giant's Heart had sought out Passing Monarch to cooperate, but Passing Monarch was too stubborn and refused the offer. He's likely regretting his decision to continue his partnership with Immortal Light. Even the Sacred Temple was afraid of the naval power Giant's Heart displayed. If Passing Monarch had agreed to work with the guild, he could have competed for the first fleet position. However, Passing Monarch had given this opportunity to Flame Robber. Big Sis Leaves, are we really going to hold back the guild's strength? The female cleric beside 100 Leaves anxiously asked. Our position in the Freedom Alliance isn't stable enough. If we openly rely on the guild's strength, even a fool would realize that we're members of the Sacred Temple, not just a team with the guild's support, 100 Leaves said, shaking her head. She then turned towards Silent Entropy's group nearby with a bright smile. Flame Robber might have Giant's Heart support, but Silent Entropy won't just take this lying down. All we need to do is watch those two go at each other's throats and wait for an opportune moment. When Sind Heart saw the various major powers' fleets from the port, he suddenly felt tiny. Immortal Light was a top-ranked naval power in the Apocalypse Empire, but if it weren't for the Storm Sailboat, it would be the weakest power here. Even Sherfong was surprised when he saw the multiple fleets. He hadn't expected God's Domain's naval powers to develop so quickly, especially Giant's Heart. Even on Dragonheart Island, very few powers could contend with the guild. Dragonheart Island's powers weren't limited to the human variety. Many neutral powers also operated from the island, including super first-rate guilds and super guilds. Once the fleets were ready, the Freedom Alliance's members began to move crate after crate of cargo onto the various powers' ships. When the representatives saw the cargo, they were stunned into a moment of silence. How is this possible? They want us to transport Primal Void Stone. There are so many Primal Void Stones here. Has the Freedom Alliance discovered a Primal Void Vein? Everyone was shocked when they saw the translucent crystals within the crates. All of these players were either experts or upper echelons from major powers, so they had seen many precious items in God's domain. However, they couldn't help their astonishment when they saw the Primal Void Stones. Primal Void Stone was a top-tier material that could be used to construct all sorts of high-ranked workshops. Primal Void Stone could absorb mana from the void, and although the amount it could store was minute, this mana could enhance players' mental processing, which was particularly useful to lifestyle players when they produced items. Buildings made with Primal Void Stone could also help combat players when training their skill or spell completion rates. Hence, the various large guilds had been desperately collecting Primal Void Stone to construct training rooms or workshops within their guild towns to help their members improve. Unfortunately, Primal Void Stone was a non-bag space item and incredibly rare. Collecting enough stones to construct a training room was a dream at this stage of the game. And yet, the Freedom Alliance revealed that it had so many available. Why wouldn't this shock the various major powers present? Seeing so many Primal Void Stones even stunned Sherfong. He hadn't thought that the Freedom Alliance would have so many in its possession. The various superpowers had treated buildings constructed with primal void stone as sacred places for their players to improve skill or spell completion rates and craft items during his previous life. However, due to the scarcity of the stone, even those superpowers had only been able to construct a small number of buildings. Hence, the Superpowers Guild members had had exclusive access to these buildings, and some of these superpowers hadn't even given access to their low-ranked members. It's no wonder why they want us to head to Ghost City. Shi Feng immediately understood the Freedom Alliance's plans when he saw the crate's contents. Primal Void Stone could be used for more than constructing buildings. It would also be helpful when improving certain dark players' bloodline density. Hence, Primal Void Stone was extremely popular among dark players, who were generally willing to pay 3 or 4 times more than the market price. I'm sure that you've all seen the Primal Void Stones. As you've probably guessed, the Freedom Alliance has taken control of a Primal Void Vein, Flame Robber suddenly announced, smiling. However, the vein's output is quite high, which makes it difficult to transfer all of the stones. Not even the Freedom Alliance can monopolize all of the stones. Thus, we wish to share our harvest with a sufficiently powerful partner. In return, the Freedom Alliance will only ask for half of the generated profits. Not only will this delivery test to Ghost City determine who qualifies to remain a partner with the Freedom Alliance, but we also hope to use the results to find a suitable collaborator for the Primal Void Veins products. Whoever among you delivers their shipment to Ghost City first will be invited to work with the Freedom Alliance regarding the Primal Void Vein. I do not believe any of our commanders are opposed to this, correct? As Flame Robber finished speaking, he glanced at the Freedom Alliance's fleet commanders beside him. Although he seemed as if he were asking for their opinions, he had no intention to negotiate. How despicable! Which commander would dare oppose such an idea under such circumstances? The female cleric behind 100 Leaves quietly cursed. Flame Robber was clearly trying to hand the share of the Primal Void Vein to Giant's Heart. Silent Entropy, who had seemed relatively calm, revealed an ugly expression. On the other hand, the other commanders silently celebrated the decision. The Primal Void Veins harvest would be distributed according to rank, with the first and second fleets gaining the most benefits. The remaining fleets would only acquire a small percentage of the goods, so it didn't really matter if they shared the harvest with a foreign power. This distribution would only harm the top-ranked fleets. None of the various major powers voiced any complaints. Even a fool could tell that Flame Robber was trying to ensure that Giant's Heart received these resources. Anyone that objected now would be setting themselves up for the Freedom Alliance to sever their relationship. Since none of his fellow commanders had anything to say, Flame Robber announced the beginning of the test. Like a raging tide, the various major powers' fleets swarmed toward the Chaos Sea. They all wanted to reach Ghost City by nightfall. Not only would the Chaos Sea's dark players have more of an advantage at night, but more sea monsters would become active as well. We should go, Brother Yi Feng. As Sind Heart watched the various fleets leave the port, he too felt an urgent need to move. Hold on a second. I have something I'd like to ask Commander Flame Robber before we leave, Shi Feng said. Instead of hurrying as everyone else did, he turned to Flame Robber nearby and asked, Commander Flame, to acquire partnership rights for the Primal Void Vein, we only need to be the first to deliver our shipment of Void Stones to Ghost City. Is that correct? Shi Feng's question confused the fleet commanders and the representatives that lingered. Why is he asking such a question? Does he think this situation is unfair? What's unfair about it? Strength is everything in God's domain. If he thinks this is unfair, he can bring it up with Giant's Heart. We watch as they beat this brat to death. He has helped Passing Monarch quite a bit in the past. Does he think Passing Monarch will do something to return the favor? All of the Freedom Alliance's commanders remembered Shi Feng, especially Identical Summer, the original Second Fleet's commander. It was Shi Feng's interference that he had fallen to the 5th Fleet position. Identical Summer wanted nothing more than watch Shi Feng die. Passing Monarch, on the other hand, could only offer a bitter smile. Even Flame Robber was puzzled as to why Shi Feng had asked such a question. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. That's right. So long as you are the first to deliver your shipment of Primal Void Stones to Ghost City, you'll become the Freedom Alliance's partner regarding the Primal Void Vein, Flame Robber firmly stated. Ah, then I can rest assured, Shi Feng said, smiling before he walked toward the crates assigned to Immortal Light. Rest assured. Everyone's confusion grew as they watched Shifeng leave. They couldn't figure out what Flame Robber had said to assure him. Shifeng then moved to a clearing near Immortal Light's shipment. He placed a hand on his bag and began to chant an incantation. 2 seconds later, a crimson, steel ship appeared above him. Even the storm sailboat looked insignificant compared to the gigantic steel beast. However, that wasn't what fascinated the players watching. What held their attention was the fact that this steel ship was floating above the ground. Chapter 2333, Starfall Shaken, a flying ship. How is this possible? The Crimson Dragon flying ship's appearance sent Starfall Island into an uproar. The Freedom Alliance's commanders and the players that rested on the island stared at the steel giant with dropped jaws. By now, practically every God's Domain player was familiar with the concept of flying ships. Players who lived in or had visited an NPC city that had an airport would have seen flying ships soar through the sky, and almost every player that had seen one dreamed of one day traveling through God's Domain aboard their own flying ship. Zero Wing actually has a flying ship, Big Sis Leaves. Short Clarity, the female cleric standing behind 100 Leaves, exclaimed, staring at the distant Crimson Dragon flying ship in astonishment. Am I dreaming? Everyone, ordinary and superpowers alike, was desperately searching for flying mounts nowadays. Naturally, the Sacred Temple was no exception, but it had yet to find a single one. And yet, Zero Wing already had a flying ship. For a moment, Short Clarity wondered if the main god system were playing a joke on her. A flying ship. It's no wonder why Zero Wing dared to provoke both Warblood and Starlink on Dragonheart Island. 100 Leaves was similarly shocked. Zero Wing has fooled everyone. Although Dragonheart Island was very far away from Sea's End, as one of the Sacred Temple's upper echelons, 100 Leaves would have been informed of matters on Dragonheart Island. The Sacred Temple had launched a detailed investigation on Zero Wing. It was the first guild in God's Domain to obtain a flying mount after all, which would have a major impact on the game. However, after watching Zero Wing blatantly provoke Warblood and Starlink, even the Sacred Temple had begun to wonder where Zero Wing found its confidence. A flying mount might possess incredible combat power and significantly reduce players' travel time, but it was only a mount. It did not have enough combat power for a single player to face an entire superpower, much less two. However, the same couldn't be said for a flying ship. Such a vessel was a bona fide war weapon. Sind Hart, who stood a short distance from Shifeng, was just as stupefied. The two great experts behind him couldn't even piece a thought together as they stared at the Crimson Dragon flying ship. They had been able to accept the fact that Shifeng had the storm sailboat. The guild had revealed that it owned a bronze sailboat a long time ago after all. It wasn't that surprising to learn that Zero Wing had a mysterious iron sailboat. But Shifeng had just pulled a flying ship from his bag. What was up with that? Meanwhile, Shifeng quickly loaded the primal void stones on the Crimson Dragon flying ship. Silence descended on the port as the nearby players watched him do it. To everyone's surprise, the shipment that would require 3 sailboats to transport fit on the single Crimson Dragon flying ship. Brother Hart, let's go. Shifeng called out once he finished transferring the crates. Shifeng's shout shook everyone from their stupor. Sind Hart replied with a stiff nod, robotically following Shifeng as he boarded the flying ship. Once Immortal Light's other members figured out what was happening, they scurried aboard the flying ship as well. As everyone watched, over 100 Immortal Light members took their places on the Crimson Dragon flying ship. From the flying ship's deck, Immortal Light's members noticed the spectators' envious gazes. At the moment they felt as if they had reached the peak of their lifetimes. Crap. Immortal Light's members are so lucky. They actually get to ride a flying ship. I wish I could ride the flying ship too. My friends would die from jealousy if they saw me on one. I knew I should have joined Zero Wing. The crowd at the port wanted nothing more than to drag Immortal Light's members off the Crimson Dragon flying ship and take their place. But when they saw the patrolling NPC soldiers, they abandoned the idea. Good. Let's set off. Once Immortal Light's members were on board, Shifeng piloted the Crimson Dragon flying ship, and it slowly ascended into the air. As the flying ship rose roughly a kilometer above the ground, he ramped up the engine. The flying ship transformed into a crimson blur as it shot forth, crossing 300 yards in the blink of an eye. It was far faster than an extraordinary flying mount. After a few short seconds, The Crimson Dragon flying ship vanished over the horizon. So, that was a flying ship? It's insanely fast. Giant's heart won't stand a chance against Immortal light. Cool. That flying ship was so cool. No matter what, I've got to join Zero Wing. After watching the Crimson Dragon flying ship fly off, a commotion erupted among the independent players and major powers members on Starfall Island. They had all known that flying ships were powerful, but they hadn't expected the vessel to be this powerful. Speedboats and sailboats were little more than snails compared to a flying ship. Furthermore, the flying ship's capacity for non-bag space items was unbeatable. The remaining representatives on the island stared after the flying ship with wide, bulging eyes. They had never dreamed that a land-based guild would pull such a move against them. A flying ship. That's impossible. Players can't get their hands on such an item. Just how did Zero Wing do it? The blue-haired woman on one of Giant's Heart's bronze sailboats exclaimed, surprised and confused after watching the Crimson Dragon flying ship soar over Giant's Heart's fleet. The Sea God's realm was one of the strongest otherworlds. Players from the otherworld had even more access to resources, legacies, and information than those on the main continent. The only thing the Sea God's realm lacked compared to the main continent was technology. The Sea God's realm simply didn't have the resources to support its lifestyle players as the main continent did. The otherworld's lifestyle classes even struggled to produce secret silver equipment. Despite the advantages the Sea God's realm's players possessed, a flying ship was still out of their reach, yet Zero Wing had one of its own. She couldn't understand how this had happened. Zero Wing, is it? The handsome man beside the blue-haired woman revealed a rare smile as he watched the Crimson Dragon flying ship fade into the distance. This is interesting. I wonder what the boss will do with this information. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Once the flying ship was gone, the Freedom Alliance's commanders revealed a myriad of expressions. Some commanders were enraged while others rejoiced. Some expressed their admiration and some voiced their envy. Passing Monarch's luck is impressive. Flame Robber has gone to great lengths to set up this ploy, yet it's turned around to bite him, 100 Leaves surmised, a hint of envy flashing in her eyes as she glanced at Passing Monarch. Regardless of what would happen to the Crimson Dragon flying ship in the future, there was no doubt that Immortal Light would win the partnership rights to the Primal Void Vein. At that time, Immortal Light was guaranteed to grow stronger, which would in turn bolster Passing Monarch's authority in the Freedom Alliance. What should we do about the Crimson Dragon flying ship, Big Sis Leaves? Short Clarity asked. We don't have the authority to decide that. We'll just report these events to the higher-ups, 100 Leaves said, an excited brightening her expression. A flying ship. This news will shake the very foundation of God's domain. Chapter 2334. Start of a new era. Shortly after Feng piloted the Crimson Dragon flying ship away from Starfall Island, the various major powers members frantically began to report to their superiors. At this point, none of them paid any mind to the Freedom Alliance's decision to re-evaluate its partners. After all, the appearance of a flying ship represented the start of a new era. Guild leader, guess what I just saw on Starfall Island? A flying ship. Someone already obtained a flying ship. What? Don't believe me? I'll send you a video of it. You'll know once you see it. That flying ship is amazing. Excitement sparked among the independent players and various powers members on Starfall Island as they discussed the Crimson Dragon flying ship. When the various powers' upper echelons received the reports, they lost their minds. Thus far, they only knew of one flying mount in a player's possession right now, let alone a flying ship. How could someone have already obtained a flying ship? However, when these upper echelons saw the video clips from their subordinates, they were utterly dumbfounded. Passion, envy, greed. These emotions overwhelmed the various major powers' upper echelons as they watched the recordings of the Crimson Dragon flying ship. Almost immediately, they ordered all-out investigations on Zero Wing. They were all determined to learn how Zero Wing had gotten its hands on the flying ship. Some powers even offered a reward of several epic weapons and equipment for any information related to the vessel on the public forums. When Feng saw the posts, the rewards even tempted him, and for a moment he even considered selling the information himself. While these major powers looked into Zero Wing and its Crimson Dragon flying ship, Feng's group reached the expansive Chaos Sea. The Chaos Sea was the Dark Forces' territory, And the sea zone was a mess of chaotic and violent energy, which was harmful to normal players' mental states. It wouldn't affect dark players, however. Rather, it would strengthen them, which was why normal players tended to avoid the area. As a sea zone, the Chaos Sea was a dangerous place to grind. Once enemy players surrounded newcomers, there'd be nowhere to run for cover. The Chaos Sea was a forbidden land for normal players. The instant the Crimson Dragon flying ship crossed into the Chaos Sea, Sindhart and his companions felt an indescribable weight bear down on them. Their senses became less sensitive as well, which made it impossible to exhibit their normal combat power. So, this is the Chaos Sea? Sindhart was relieved he was aboard the Crimson Dragon flying ship as he gazed at the thin layer of fog that covered the ocean below. The Chaos Sea was far more dangerous than he had expected. The thin fog that covered the water wasn't actual fog. It was the physical manifestation of some kind of chaotic energy. This chaotic energy had a powerful influence on normal players. While surrounded by the fog, he could, at most, see up to 1,000 yards away. However, it wouldn't affect dark players in the slightest. In other words, dark players would discover normal players in the Chaos Sea long before normal players could realize they were being targeted. The dark players would have the initiative in battle and normal players would have no way to escape. After a few minutes, Sindhart and the others noticed a group of players ganging up on a level 93 mythic ranked sea monster. Every one of those players rode an 8-meter-tall demonic creature into battle. Players had nicknamed these demonic creatures mini sea monsters. The demonic creatures were incredibly powerful, with the weakest among them possessing the strength of a lord. The stronger creatures could even rival a great lord's strength. They were far more powerful than land mounts. Meanwhile, bombarded by the fierce attacks of several hundred demonic creatures, the level 93 mythic sea monster rapidly lost HP. Oceania demonic creatures might not have as much attack power as an actual ship, but they were easily more mobile. Moreover, they could easily tank a mythic sea monster's attacks with their high HPs and player-made armor. It was only a matter of time before the level 93 mythic sea monster fell. They're looking this way. They've discovered us. Thankfully we're flying. If we were sailing, they'd likely annihilate us. Immortal Light's members felt an immense pressure bear down on them as they watched the dark players below. Even the lowest leveled player among those dark players was level 95. And they all radiated auras that were as strong as great lords of the same level. If these several hundred dark players attacked with their demonic creatures, they could likely decimate an entire expert fleet. Meanwhile, countless dark teams of their caliber filled the Chaos Sea. Just the thought of sailing through all of those players made their scalps tingle. Fortunately, Immortal Light's members rode Zero Wings flying ship. Even if those dark players had noticed them, they couldn't do anything about it. The dark players could only stare as they flew away. The dark players fighting the mythic sea monster were even more shocked than Immortal Light's players. A flying ship? What's going on? I thought only one player in God's domain has found a flying mount thus far? How does someone already have a flying ship? They're not here to kill steel, are they? The dark players nervously watched the steel giant fly across the sky. They were all afraid that the vessel's pilot had set their sights on their team. Their team had gone to great lengths to locate this mythic sea monster, and they were banking on it to elevate their overall combat power so they could contest for better hunting grounds later. If that flying ship decided to steal the kill, they'd only be able to cry as they watched someone else claim their prey. None of them were afraid of a fight, but a battle was only worth fighting if they had a chance. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. A flying ship was a war weapon and an overlord of the sky. Its combat power was on an entirely different level. Their demonic creatures wouldn't be much help either. Demonic creatures were quite mobile, but they had very few long-range attacks. If the Crimson Dragon flying ship stopped 400 or 500 meters above them and bombarded the team from there, they wouldn't have any means to retaliate. As the Crimson Dragon flying ship drifted out of sight, the dark players breathed a sigh of relief and continued their raid on the level 93 mythic sea monster with peace of mind. The Chaos Sea was large enough that it could contain multiple land-based empires. Even a bronze sailboat would need more than a day to travel from Starfall Island to Ghost City. However, the Crimson Dragon flying ship could complete the journey in several hours. As the city came into sight, Sindhart felt as if he were dreaming. Chapter 2335. Profitable trading. As the gigantic Crimson Dragon flying ship appeared above Ghost City, It attracted everyone's attention like a dazzling sun. The flying steel giant was impossible not to notice. The roar of the flying ship's engine reverberated like the roar of a dragon. One could even hear it from several thousand yards away. What's going on? Did someone trigger an event? No, that should be the rumored flying ship that appeared at sea not long ago. It's come to Ghost City. Which power owns that flying ship? Aren't they a little too strong? Heated discussions erupted across Ghost City when players noticed the Crimson Dragon flying ship. The dark players it had flown over earlier had already posted about it on the Chaos Sea's official forums, which had already caused a huge commotion. Now that the ship had appeared above Ghost City, how could the city's players ignore it? As they arrived, Shifeng didn't linger above the city for too long, piloting the flying ship toward Ghost City's airport. There were a total of 24 cities within the Chaos Sea, and they were all very far apart from each other. Normally, players had to rely on sea or air transportation to travel from one city to another. Thus, every one of the Chaos Sea's cities had well-developed ports and airports. Disembarking, Shifeng stored the Crimson Dragon flying ship and entered the airport terminal. As he did, he was greeted by a large crowd of dark players and a smattering of normal players. The dark players didn't seem surprised to see normal players like Shifeng and Immortal Light's members. It wasn't unusual for players to risk the trip through the Chaos Sea for a profit. Player-owned counters filled the terminal, all selling a variety of precious items. Ghost City's airport was just as lively as the auction houses in the capital city of kingdoms. This place is bustling. Sindhart could not believe his eyes when he saw the number of players and precious items in the terminal. Is this city really controlled by the Dark Forces? From his impression of the Dark Forces, their territories should be chaotic, filled with endless slaughter. They shouldn't look anything like this prosperous city. Moreover, the items available for purchase were so valuable that even Sindhart, Immortal Light's guild leader, was tempted. These vendors sold secret silver mounts and Tier 3 summoning scrolls that were quite rare in the Apocalypse Empire. Moreover, these items were available in abundance. He even spotted one player selling over a dozen bronze speedboats, which weren't available at all in the Apocalypse Empire. The rest of Immortal Light's members were just as excited, wanting nothing more than to claim every one of these items. Only Shifeng maintained his composure when he saw the wide variety of products for sale in the airport terminal. Chaos did reign over the Dark Forces' territories, but that chaos stopped at a city's borders. As the only safe havens for dark players to rest, the Dark Forces ensured safety within their NPC cities, allowing players to conduct their business. Due to how few cities there were in the Chaos Sea, it was only natural that these cities would prosper. In addition, dark players had very different values than their normal counterparts. Some items that were quite important to normal players had no value to dark players. Since the Chaos Sea's dark players used oceanic demonic creatures as their preferred mode of transportation at sea, land mounts and ships were worthless to them. Moreover, dark players prioritized their own strength over all else, so they weren't particularly interested in external tools. Those that relied on such tools would struggle to secure powerful legacies. Thus, players generally sold external tools for low prices in the Dark Forces domain. This was also why the various naval powers were interested in conducting business in the Chaos Sea. When Sindhart noticed the primal void stones for sale and saw their prices, he had the urge to curse, even with as mild-tempered as he typically was. Primal void stones sold for as high as 5 to 10 gold per stone on the main continent. The inconvenience of transporting the stones was a large part of the reason that they sold for such a high price, but compared to the primal void stones in Ghost City, the stones on the main continent were dirt cheap. These players were selling primal void stones for 40 gold apiece. Moreover, these dark players fought to purchase any primal void stones they could, even at such a high price. They cleaned the vendors of every stone in no time. Only the counters that demanded 60 gold per primal void stone had any remaining stock. Here, primal void stones were incredibly profitable. The Freedom Alliance had tasked each power to transport 300 primal void stones for its test. As an incentive, the Freedom Alliance had also offered each power that completed the task half of their shipment. Even if they sold their primal void stones at 50 gold each, they'd make 7,500 gold from this trip alone. If they could deliver such large shipments to Ghost City each day, they'd walk away with an astounding amount of profit. Sindheart finally understood why Shifeng had insisted on competing for the partnership rights to the Primal Void Vein, going so far as to expose the Crimson Dragon flying ship to the other major powers, becoming a target. If they could deliver Primal Void Stones to Ghost City long-term, they'd likely earn more profit than a guild city. Even a lousy Primal Void Vein should generate several thousand Primal Void Stones each day. Even if Immortal Light and Zero Wing only secured 1,000 Primal Void Stones per day and shared half of the profits with the Freedom Alliance, they'd make over 25,000 gold a day. If they sold the stones at a higher price, they could even rake in 30,000 gold per day. Even a first-rate guild would go crazy for such massive profits. Sindheart wasn't the only one surprised by the Primal Void Stones prices. The situation even shocked Shifeng. Within the Dark Forces territories, Primal Void Stone had only sold for 20 gold per stone during his previous life, yet now that price was more than double. It was no wonder why the Freedom Alliance wanted to find partners to help deliver its stock. Shifeng quickly handed off half of his shipment to the Freedom Alliance's representatives in Ghost City, putting the other half of the Primal Void Stones up for sale. By the time all 150 of his Primal Void Stones had sold, he had earned a net profit of 7,650 gold. If they secured the Freedom Alliance's partnership rights, both Zero Wing and Immortal Light would secure a long-term source of coin and Primal Void Stone income. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Once they completed the Freedom Alliance's test, Shifeng and his companions left Ghost City. They wanted to sign their partnership contract with the Freedom Alliance as soon as possible, so they used return scrolls to teleport back to Blue Jade City. From there, they flew to Starfall Island aboard the Crimson Dragon flying ship. As soon as they arrived in Starfall Town, they sensed a tense atmosphere around the town. For some reason, the various major powers' representatives now stood outside of the entrance to Freedom Alliance's residence. These representatives didn't seem surprised or envious as they watched Shifeng and the others return. Rather, some of them sneered at the group while others watched with pity. Shifeng approached the residence's entrance and 5 players, a woman and 4 men, wearing Giant's Heart's Guild emblem, blocked his way. The woman was the player with blue hair that Shifeng had met during the meeting, and the 4 men behind her were all level 97 players, radiating auras that were no weaker than a great lords of the same level. Unlike Sindheart, who only had the combat power of a peak expert, all 4 of the men were bona fide peak experts. "You're back. Come with me. Our boss wants to meet with you," the blue-haired woman coldly stated as she glanced at Shifeng. Chapter 2336, Giant's Invitation. When they heard the blue-haired woman's declaration, the various powers' representatives glanced at Shifeng with varying expressions. Sure enough, Giant's Heart is making its move. I knew this would happen. With the Primal Void Stone's potential profits, neither the First Fleet nor Giant's Heart can let this go so easily. Zero Wing doesn't know how to take a hint. Flame Robber is clearly trying to share the Primal Void Vein with Giant's Heart, yet Zero Wing dared to interfere. All of these powers wanted the partnership rights to the Primal Void Vein as well, but they knew that they couldn't get their hands on it with a superpower like Giant's Heart already in the way. Zero Wing's determination to win the competition was no different than pulling a tiger's whiskers. The Freedom Alliance might be a powerhouse in Sea's End, but its strength was limited to the sea. However, even super guilds were wary of Giant's Heart, both on land and at sea. Now retribution had come for Zero Wing. Just as Sindheart was about to step forward, the 4 experts behind the blue-haired woman noticed, and the intensity of their auras skyrocketed. All 4 of the men stared Sindheart down. These 4 were bona fide peak experts with extraordinary legacies and equipment standards to rival Sindheart's. When their aggressive auras washed over Sindheart, he felt as if he were being watched by 4 ferocious beasts. He sensed that these 4 would pounce and kill him if he made any sudden movements. So this is Giant's Heart's strength? Suddenly, Sindheart didn't feel in control of his own life as he squirmed under the experts' gazes. He was one of the top 10 elementalists in the Apocalypse Empire, and he had defeated his fair share of peak experts. However, every one of the 4 experts before him felt like a major threat. Even if he had backup from Immortal Light, he was certain that he'd die here if all 4 attacked together. Moreover, he suspected that the blue-haired woman was the most frightening of the 5. Sindheart didn't know exactly how strong the blue-haired woman was, but it was clear that the 4 experts behind her respected her greatly. In God's domain, Players that had risen to the standard of peak experts would even enjoy very high status within superpowers. The various superpowers would fight to recruit such players, and it was no exaggeration to say that a peak expert could join any superpower they wished. Because of this, peak experts tended to be quite prideful. Peak experts only truly respected more powerful experts. Giant's heart is quite impressive to nurture such a young domain realm expert such as yourself, Shifeng flattered, smiling at the indifferent blue-haired woman. Since your guild has invited me, please, lead the way. Shifeng was not surprised that Giant's heart had sought him out. The primal void stones would be a huge source of income, even to the various superpowers. He would have actually been surprised if Giant's heart hadn't made a fuss. Astonished, Sind Heart glanced between Shifeng and the blue-haired woman. He hadn't been aware of a domain realm expert's true strength a few months ago, but as he grew stronger that factor became clear. Defeating an expert of his caliber would be child's play for a domain realm expert. But as far as he knew, only old monsters were domain realm experts. This blue-haired woman appeared to be at most 23 years old. Even the term genius wasn't a sufficient description. Meanwhile, the blue-haired woman couldn't help but pay more attention to the man before her, surprised and confused by Shifeng's statement. She had only reached the domain realm 7 days ago, and very few people in her guild knew about the accomplishment. She was very careful to hide her combat standards, ensuring that even domain realm experts would dismiss her as a void realm expert at most. She had never expected Shifeng to recognize her for what she truly was. Are we really going to go with them, Brother Yifeng? Sind Heart asked worriedly in the team chat. Just standing before these 5 players put their lives at risk. If they entered Giant's Heart's territory, they'd be at the guild's mercy. Since we've received such a grand reception, why wouldn't we? Shifeng countered, chuckling. Shifeng's response rendered Sind Heart speechless. Shifeng wasn't wrong about this being a grand reception. A guild wouldn't even send 4 peak experts and a domain realm expert to escort the guild leaders of the Apocalypse Empire's top-ranked first-rate guilds. However, this party clearly harbored ill intentions. Let's go. Our boss doesn't have much time to waste, the blue-haired woman said, annoyed. She had wanted no part in this situation in the first place. As far as she was concerned, Giant's Heart already showed enough respect by sending 4 peak experts to escort Shifeng. But her superiors had given her a command and she hadn't had a choice. The blue-haired woman then turned and led Shifeng and Sind Heart into the Freedom Alliance's residence. The other Immortal Light members, however, were forced to wait outside. Following the young woman, Shifeng and his companions soon found themselves outside of the residence's top-floor reception room. Sind Heart was dumbfounded to see 8 Giant's Heart experts guarding the doors. Although these 8 experts were only level 96, they all radiated incredibly powerful auras. Sind Heart could tell that they all had stronger life ratings than the 4 peak experts that had greeted them at the residence's entrance. Only these experts hadn't reached the Void Realm yet. Even so, their combat power should only be slightly weaker than the 4 peak experts. With such a formidable foundation, Giant's Heart could annihilate Immortal Light with little effort. Go in, the blue-haired woman said as she pushed open the reception room's doors. Nodding, Shifeng entered the room with Sind Heart by his side. From the nearby hallway, several Freedom Alliance commanders watched this unfold. Haha. It seems passing Monarch will be disappointed. Identical Summer, the current 5th Fleet's commander, commented, laughing. When he had seen Zero Wing's flying ship and knew it would win the partnership rights to the Primal Void Vein, he had nearly gone mad, but now that Giant's Heart had stepped in, he couldn't wait to see how Zero Wing intended to get out of this mess. At the end of the day, some things are simply impossible to obtain. If Zero Wing gives up the partnership rights, it should be able to continue working with the Freedom Alliance. 100 Leaves surmised with a sigh. Zero Wing had won the partnership rights, but the guild was still too naive. In one of the past's virtual reality games, the various superpowers would have likely let the matter slide. But in God's domain, there were just too many benefits and secrets. It would not be easy for non-superpowers to claim such a valuable resource in this game. Meanwhile, a handsome white-haired man reclined on one of the sofas in the reception room. The moment Sind Heart entered the room, he was overwhelmed by a strange, stifling sensation. Is that man a monster? Sind Heart felt cold sweat slide down his back as he looked at the white-haired man before him. The man didn't reveal any killing intent or seem dissatisfied, yet Sind's heart was terrified. His instincts screamed at him to stay away from that man and run. So, you're Zero Wings Yifeng? I am It Autumn, one of Giant's Heart's vice guild leaders. The White High introduced himself. He sipped from his teacup before smiling at his guests and continued, I've heard about you before. It seems you have a lot of authority in Zero Wing and have even led some of the guild's major operations. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. That's right, Xianxia confirmed, nodding. That makes this simple. I have come here in hopes of purchasing Zero Wing's Crimson Dragon flying ship. Are you willing to sell it? If you agree, not only will Giant's Heart help you stabilize your claim on the Primal Void Vein's benefits, but we'll also sell you some Ocean Boundary Stones, a resource unique to the Sea God's realm, White Autumn explained. Ocean Boundary Stone is a precious item that can help players learn combat techniques more efficiently. It can even help peak experts master the incredibly complex bronze combat techniques. When the blue-haired woman heard White Autumn's offer to sell Ocean Boundary Stones, she was stunned. Ocean Boundary Stones were extremely rare in the Sea God's realm, just as rare as epic equipment. Even Giant's Heart only had a small number on hand and had refused to sell its stock to outsiders. Your offer is quite attractive, Vice Guild Leader White, but Zero Wing has no intention of selling the Crimson Dragon flying ship. Xianxia shook his head, rejecting the offer without a second thought. Chapter 2337, Ocean Boundary Stone. Silence filled the room after Xianxia had rejected Giant's Heart's offer. Sind's heart looked particularly gloomy. He hadn't expected Xianxia to refuse White Autumn so curtly. The blue-haired woman behind White Autumn could only stare at Xianxia in astonishment. Xianxia should have been ecstatic to accept White Autumn's offer. Giant's Heart was incredibly powerful, even strong enough to contend with super guilds. It ruled over all of the Sea God's realm. If Zero Wing had agreed to trade with Giant's Heart, it would have earned the superpower's favor, which countless powers dreamed of. This was especially true now that God's domain had entered such a chaotic era with the planar passages opening. A flying ship was very valuable, but the various superpowers now knew of it and had begun to set their sights on Zero Wing. Holding on to the flying ship wouldn't be easy for the guild. If Zero Wing had accepted the offer, not only would it have gained Giant's Heart's favor, but it would have also secured a ton of resources to help its experts grow stronger. Not even Starlink would have casually attacked Zero Wing, much less Warblood, yet Xianxia had rejected the offer without any hesitation. Is he unaware of our guild's strength? It was the only possibility the blue-haired woman could think of. There was no other reason that Xianxia would refuse such an excellent opportunity. Zero Wing doesn't intend to sell it? How unfortunate, White Autumn said, sighing. Contrary to everyone's expectations, he didn't seem angry about Xianxia's response. Rather, he maintained his composure as he continued. Since that is the case, may I ask to borrow the flying ship to complete a quest? I'm willing to offer 5 Ocean Boundary Stones as remuneration. Help with a quest? After giving the matter some thought, Xianxia said, I don't see an issue with that. How long will the quest take to complete? Xianxia did find the Ocean Boundary Stones tempting. They were the 5th best tool in God's domain to improve players' efficiency with learning combat techniques. 2 Ocean Boundary Stones had been as valuable as a piece of level 100+ epic equipment during his previous life, but even when offered such a trade, very few powers had been willing to part with their stones. White Autumn's offer of 5 Ocean Boundary Stones was the equivalent of 2.5 pieces of level 100+ epic equipment, which was a considerably high price to rent a flying ship. With 5 Ocean Boundary Stones, 5 of Xianxia's peak experts could learn a bronze combat technique and acquire the combat power to face domain realm experts. Most powers lacked bronze combat techniques, but Zero Wing wasn't one of them. The guild had found quite a few bronze legacy tablets thus far and had the secret technique Lightning Flash. Xianxia was the only guild member to grasp the technique. If Fire Dance or Gentle Snow could master it as well, they'd display extraordinary combat power with the help of their fragmented legendary items. It'll take roughly 3 days. If we can complete the quest ahead of time, I'm willing to offer an additional Ocean Boundary Stone, White Autumn said after some mental calculations. Chuckling, he continued, even if we fail the quest, I will pay you 1 Ocean Boundary Stone in exchange for the flying ship's rental and any damage it sustains. We have a deal, Shifeng agreed. Ocean boundary stones were an incredibly important resource to the various super guilds, not to mention Zero Wing. May I know when this quest will begin? If Zero Wing had had enough materials to produce 2 Crimson Dragon flying ships, Shifeng would have agreed to trade one for a large batch of ocean boundary stones, using them to nurture a large force of peak experts. We'll set off in 15 hours, White Autumn answered. Our destination is a very dangerous one. I should take this time to rest and prepare. All right. Let's sign a contract now then, Shifeng said after a quick look through his schedule. He had some free time so he might as well use it to make some extra income. White Autumn and Shifeng signed the contract, and now that they were bound, Giant's Heart could proceed with the quest with peace of mind. Shifeng then left the room to sign his partnership agreement with the Freedom Alliance. Meanwhile, the blue-haired woman who had remained silent during the meeting finally spoke up. Vice Guild Leader, are you really planning to challenge that quest again? The blue-haired woman asked. White Autumn kept most people in the dark, but as one of the guild's domain realm experts, she knew what was happening. The man intended to challenge one of the Sea God's realm's epic main storyline quests. Giant's Heart had 3 chances to complete the quest but had already failed twice. Clearly, White Autumn hadn't given up, but if they failed again the quest would vanish. Our chances of success will be much higher with a flying ship on our side. Moreover, we're running out of time to complete the quest, White Autumn said, chuckling. If we can complete it, Giant's Heart will have all it needs to establish itself in the Fire Dragon Empire. Even if the Pride Empire sends everything it has at us, it won't have the power to remove us from the Empire. But is it really okay to take Yifeng with us? The blue-haired woman asked worriedly. Only 10 players can enter that place, and without a special legacy, not even a peak expert will last more than 10 seconds. If he dies, he'll be thrown out of the area without any opportunity for a healer to resurrect him. Things will become difficult once we're inside, but I'll have Blue Claw and the others share the burden. You've also reached the domain realm. With our current strength, we should be able to complete the quest, White Autumn insisted. I'll notify Blue Claw and the others then, the blue-haired woman said, nodding. Inwardly, she prayed that Shifeng would not hold them back. Elsewhere, the various major powers and the Freedom Alliance's commanders were shocked as Shifeng signed the contract for the Primal Void Vein partnership rights. None of them had expected Zero Wing to win the competition, and Giant's Heart hadn't tried to oppose the situation. Now that Zero Wing had the partnership rights to the Primal Void Vein, both Zero Wing and Immortal Light had secured another stable source of income. Since Immortal Light lacked sufficient naval power, Shifeng decided to lend the guild the Storm Sailboat for now. Shifeng then made another delivery to Ghost City aboard his Crimson Dragon flying ship during his 15-hour wait. During their second visit to the city, Sindhart had emptied his pockets to purchase 7 bronze speedboats and 2 sailboats, instantly boosting Immortal Light's naval prowess. Moreover, Passing Monarch spared no effort to help Sindhart, sending one of his expert fleets to assist Immortal Light. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Now, even without the flying ship, Immortal Light could deliver Primal Void Stones to Ghost City without fearing the Chaos Sea's dark players. The guild would also deliver Zero Wing's share to its branch guild in the Apocalypse Empire. Selling Primal Void Stones to the Dark Forces was an excellent way to make a fortune. But to Shifeng, the Primal Void Stones themselves were more valuable than the coins he could gain by selling them, especially when he had access to so many. The more he had, the valuable the stones would be. Current players just didn't know it yet. Time passed quickly while Shifeng made these arrangements. Before he knew it, the 15 hours were nearly up. I should head to Blue Jade City now. Taking a look at the time, Shifeng pulled a return scroll from his bag and teleported to Blue Jade City. Chapter 2338 Legacy Combat Technique Sees End, Blue Jade City. After appearing in Blue Jade City's teleportation hall, Shifeng noticed the blue-haired woman from Giant's Heart. She carried a legacy crystal ball and was in the midst of learning a combat technique. A legacy combat technique. Shifeng was stunned to see the crystal ball in the woman's hands. God's Domain's combat techniques fell into various categories, each rarer than the last. Offensive techniques, defensive techniques, footwork, and physical techniques. The rarest and most unique of these were legacy combat techniques. Legacy combat techniques were a special type, unlike ordinary combat techniques. They were limited to specific classes. players without the appropriate class couldn't learn one even if they obtained it. Every legacy combat technique was as rare as a fragmented legendary item, and they didn't possess fixed ranks. The standard of the techniques depended on the user's mastery of them. All legacy combat techniques started out at bronze rank, and the greater a player's master was, the more power they could wield with the technique. According to rumors Shifeng had heard, a player could acquire the strength to transcend tiers if they could fully master a legacy combat technique, even without relying on fragmented legendary or legendary items. Shifeng had never thought that he'd run into the woman-form giant's heart carrying a legacy combat technique around. By the looks of it, she'd already gained a certain level of mastery over the technique too. "You're here." The blue-haired woman stored the legacy crystal ball in her bag when she noticed Shifeng. Her tone serious, she continued, "Since you'll be questing with us, I should formally introduce myself. I am Xianxia, the Vice Commander of Giant's Heart's main force. The quest we'll be doing is unusually difficult. Even domain realm experts can lose their lives if they're not careful. I hope you won't act recklessly during the quest. We won't be able to save you. All you'll need to do is survive. Rest assured. I might not be particularly skilled in all aspects, but I'm quite good at keeping myself alive," Shifeng replied, smiling. Xianxia's warning made him a bit curious. Domain realm experts stood at the apex of God's domain. An averagely geared domain realm expert's performance would be even better than that of a peak expert in full top-tier equipment during a high-ranked quest. There were very few quests of the same level that could threaten an apex expert fully geared in top-tier equipment. "Good. Let's go." Xianxia had nothing more to say after hearing Shifeng's confident response. She then led him toward the Continental Teleportation Array, and they traveled to the Fire Dragon Empire. Once they arrived, Xianxia pulled a teleportation stone from her bag and teleported both of them to a heavenly land of verdant mountains and clear rivers. System: you have discovered the Sea God's realm. System: as you have reached Tier 3 and are not indigenous to the Sea God's realm, the world's power works against you, weakening your physique by 30% and basic attributes by 20%. We've teleported directly to the Sea God's realm? Giant's Heart's generosity surprised Shifeng as he looked at his system map. Teleportation stones were incredibly valuable in God's domain. As long as the registered location was within range, players could use teleportation stones to transport a maximum of 5 players. Planar teleportation stones were the stronger version. Planar teleportation stones allowed players to cross dimensions and travel to a registered otherworld instantly. Although they couldn't be used in areas that prohibited teleportation, planar teleportation stones were a powerful life-saving tool. And yet Xianxia had used one so casually. After their arrival, Shifeng noticed 8 other players on the mountaintop, sitting before an ancient ruin. While Autumn was one of them. Of the remaining 7, the weakest was a peak expert who was very close to reaching the domain realm. To Shifeng's surprise, not all of the 7 were members of Giant's Heart. 2 of them were independent players. Neither of the independent players had reached the domain realm yet, but they had slightly superior life ratings to Xianxia's. The ambient water-type mana seemed to gather around those 2 players. Sea God's direct kin? The Sea God's realm really is extraordinary. It's no wonder why Giant's Heart can contend with Pride Empire. Shifeng could not help but re-evaluate his view of the Sea God's realm upon noticing the 2 independent players. All Sea God's kin had received the Sea God's blessing. Becoming a Sea God's kin was like completing a trial of God. Of course, a hero received blessings from multiple gods. A single god's blessing wasn't enough. Even so, players who became Sea God's kin received a huge boost to their life ratings and could rival demon players in their demon forms. Those that were stronger than a god's kin were a god's direct kin. Direct kin were cherished by their patron gods, receiving some of the god's blood. Direct kin could continue to grow stronger and rival actual heroes. Shifeng had never expected to encounter independent players that had successfully become the Sea God's direct kin. Regardless of how powerful a Sea God's direct kin would be in the Sea God's realm, not even Aqua Rose would be a match for these independent players on the main continent sea. Everyone's finally arrived. But White, why are we taking an outsider with us? What will you do if we fail this quest? Silent Rain, a level 97 elementalist and one of the 2 independent players, asked. Giant's Heart's members flashed the elementalist a dark look when they heard her question, But despite their annoyance at Silent Rain's rudeness, none of them moved to teach him a lesson. That bastard. Just because he became a direct kin, he dares to disrespect our vice guild leader? Linya grumbled to herself. She wanted nothing more than to teach Silent Rain a lesson, but the Sea God's direct kin were highly favored in the Sea God's realm. Even domain realm experts who were also Sea God's kin were no match for the combat power Silent Rain commanded, even though he hadn't yet reached the domain realm. In fact, not even 4 such domain realm experts working together would be a match for the man. I believe you've heard of the flying ship that appeared while you were in the Fire Dragon Empire, White Autumn calmly stated. Yi Feng owns that flying ship, which is why I've specifically invited him to help us on this quest. I have specifically invited him to help us with this quest. A flying ship? Shocked, the 7 players turned toward Shifeng. The Crimson Dragon flying ship's appearance had caused a huge commotion in the Fire Dragon Empire. Practically everyone in the Empire had heard of it by now. Aside from the convenient transportation it offered, the flying ship's combat power alone left everyone speechless. Based on what players had learned of the flying ship thus far, only mythic-ranked flying monsters would have any chance against it, and they wouldn't even have the power to destroy the Crimson Dragon flying ship. A flying ship? It seems that you're quite impressive, kid, Silent Rain said to Shifeng, a hint of envy and greed flashing in his eyes. With less than a handful of flying mounts in God's domain, a flying ship was a priceless treasure. If he had one of his own, he could walk through God's domain unhindered as long as the various superpowers didn't go all out to stop him. Alright, we don't have much time left. Let's hurry and go in. Otherwise, we'll have to wait another 2 days before we can enter. The other independent player, a level 97 berserker, quickly interrupted when he noticed the tension between his comrades. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. We are running out of time, Silent Rain agreed after taking a look at the time. He then smiled at Shifeng, saying, once we're in, all you need to do is follow me, kid. I'll keep you safe. That's none of your concern, Rain. We'll handle Yi Feng's protection. You just need to do your own job, a stern man in his 30s coldly stated from beside White Autumn. Blue, do you think anyone in the Sea God's realm is stronger than me? Silent Rain shot back disdainfully, glancing at the stern man named Blue Claw. As Blue Claw was about to offer a harsh reply, White Autumn interjected, enough. We will proceed as planned. Let's hurry and get inside. Although White Autumn hadn't spoken loudly, every one of the 9 players felt his authority. Neither Silent Rain nor Blue Claw said anything more. The team quietly entered the ruin one after another, and Shifeng followed Linya into the cave. Chapter 2339. Go ahead if you can. The cave was dimly lit. After everyone in the team entered it, a magic barrier appeared and sealed off its mouth. Now, players would no longer be able to enter or exit the cave unless they found the mechanism to remove the barrier. Inside this dim environment, even Tier 2 experts couldn't see more than 30 yards away, a considerably disadvantageous situation to current players. A distance of 30 yards might seem very far, but level 90+ Lord-ranked monsters could cross it in 2 seconds at most, getting within melee range. If a group of lords suddenly charged forward, even Tier 2 experts would take damage. Our quest begins now. Everyone stay cautious. There are many diverging paths here, so stick close to each other, White Autumn commanded. Linya, you scout ahead. Blue, focus on protecting Yi Feng. The monsters here are far stronger than the monsters found outside. Yi Feng, you pay attention as well. Players that are not a Sea God's kin will be heavily restricted here. You must not try to solo the monsters here at all. In response to White Autumn's warning, Shifeng simply replied with a silent nod. The suppression this ruin subjected players to was indeed powerful. The instant the magic barrier sealed off the cave, the inside of the cave felt as if it had transformed into a completely different world. Shifeng could also feel the suppression on him intensifying. Now, although the suppression of his basic attributes remained the same, his physique was only 60% of his original. Moreover, the sensitivity of his 5 senses had decreased sharply. It was no wonder Linya and White Autumn were constantly reminding him to be careful. Under such a powerful suppression, even Tier 2 experts would not be able to fight a Lord-ranked monster of the same level. If they came across a group of lords, their fates would basically be sealed. Even domain realm experts would not fare much better in this scenario. After all, the greatest factor differentiating ordinary experts and domain realm experts was their control over their five senses. A suppression of the five senses would affect domain realm experts much more than it would affect ordinary experts. However, the ruin's suppression had minimal effect on White Autumn and the others, who were sea gods' kin. On the trek into the cave, Linya, who was an assassin, was fully responsible for scouting out the path ahead. The two sea gods' direct kin of the team handled clearing out the monsters in the way. Although the suppression on direct kin was negligible, the monsters inside the cave were still extraordinarily powerful. Naga Siren, Bloodline Creature, Great Lord, Level 98 HP 63, 000, 000/63, 000, 000 Nagas possessing special bloodlines filled the cave. Occasionally, the Nagas would suddenly appear from a branch cave and execute a hit-and-run attack on the team or launch a long-range ambush using crossbows. Every one of these Nagas was like a well-trained expert assassin. They also possessed combat standards reaching the Trial Tower's 5th floor. To White Autumn and the others, however, these Nagas posed very little threat. After all, every one of them possessed basic attributes rivaling those of a great lord of the same level. As for the Silent Rain and Uneducated Bull, the two direct kin of the team, their basic attributes were even higher. Before the dozen or so ambushing Nagas could get close to the team, they were already sent flying by a bunch of powerful attacks. We cannot waste stamina here. Accelerate our advance. White Autumn ordered as he shoved back a Naga with his shield. The Nagas inside the cave were endless. No matter how many Nagas the players killed, more would just take the place of the fallen. If they did not speed up their progress, they would eventually die from exhaustion even if they were more powerful. At White Autumn's words, everyone immediately hastened their footsteps. For the next 3 hours or so, the team kept pushing through swarms of Nagas. However, as they moved deeper into the cave system, not only did the terrain become increasingly complex, but the number of Nagas that attacked them each time also multiplied. Initially, each group would have only a dozen or so Nagas. Eventually, that number increased to at least 20. In addition, the Nagas' coordination with each other constantly improved. Even though White Autumn and the others possessed very high combat standards, they still could not help but feel more and more pressured. Fortunately, this was not White Autumn and the others' first time visiting this place, so they were very familiar with the cave system's paths. Eventually, after fighting for another 2 hours or so, the team arrived at an extremely expansive cavern that housed a large temple. The instant everyone entered this underground cavern, a magic barrier appeared and sealed off the tunnel behind them, preventing the Nagas from chasing them any further. How close? Sure enough, it's much tougher now that we're bringing one more person. Silent Rain said. Glancing at White Autumn, he continued, White, we never agreed to bring an additional person before. You have to increase our remuneration once we get back. Rain, you best not go overboard. The Vice Guild leader already offered you a high remuneration. Moreover, our people were the ones responsible for protecting Yifeng. You were only responsible for opening up the path, Linya countered, frowning. She felt very dissatisfied with Silent Rain's demand. If not for this ruin being special, they wouldn't have allowed non-guild members to participate in this quest at all. Fine then. You guys tank the monsters later on. I'll stay in the rear. If that's the case, I won't have any objections. Silent Rain sneered as he pointed at the two golem monsters standing guard before the temple. Rock Giant, Elemental Creature, Grand Lord, Level 101 HP 375,000, 000/375, 000, 000. Linya's complexion turned ashen at Silent Rain's words. Everyone present was fully aware of how powerful level 100+ monsters were. This was especially true for the two rock giants before them. Through her previous experience fighting against these two rock giants, Linya knew that they were not monsters that current players could hope to go up against, even while in an unsuppressed state. Meanwhile, players were prohibited from using magic tools and berserk skills while inside this ruin. In such a situation, even White Autumn, who was a guardian knight, could only hold his ground against one of these rock giants for a very short period. Hence, they had to rely on Silent Rain and Uneducated Bull, who were direct kin, to tank and distract the rock giants while the others opened the temple's doors. How much do you want? White Autumn asked. From his calm reaction, he had long since expected this situation to occur. Not much. Just give the two of us one extra ocean boundary stone each. You should know that as direct kin we burn through ocean boundary stones much more quickly than you people. Moreover, unlike independent players like us, you people from Giant's Heart are filthy rich, Silent Rain replied, smiling. However, just as White Autumn was about to agree to Silent Rain's demands, Shifeng suddenly spoke up in the team chat. Vice Guild Leader White, you'll pay 2 ocean barrier stones to whoever can tank those 2 monsters? Shifeng asked. Everyone on the team turned involuntarily to look at him in surprise. Why is this guy adding fuel to the fire? Lin Ya's mood soured greatly when she heard Shifeng's question. Giant's Heart had expended a lot of effort just to protect Shifeng, yet he was actually helping Silent Rain stir up trouble. In this situation, White Autumn also could not help eyeing Shifeng strangely, wondering what Shifeng was up to. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. If you can safely stop these 2 monsters for 30 seconds, I'll gladly give you 2 more ocean barrier stones, White Autumn said. He did not particularly mind making this additional transaction. Instead, he was more curious about what Shifeng was planning to do. What? Kid, you want to give it a try as well? Silent Rain laughed loudly at this development. Sure. Go ahead if you can. I won't object. As long as you can tank those 2 monsters, I'll also give you the remuneration White promised me. Even a sea god's direct kin like him still had a very tough time tanking one rock giant. The slightest mistake would mean his life. On the other hand, Shifeng wasn't even a sea god's kin. It would be a miracle if he could tank one of the rock giants, let alone 2. If that's the case, I'll give it a try, Shifeng said before slowly approaching the 2 rock giants. The instant Shifeng got within 100 yards of the 2 rock giants, the latter's eyes suddenly released a crimson glow. Both Grand Lords then started pacing toward the swordsman, their bodies releasing a frightening pressure that made everyone tense up. Chapter 2340, Tier 3 Sword King. This guy is seriously making more problems for us. Silent Rain has to go all out just to deal with one rock giant. How can one person possibly tank 2? Lin Ya's complexion turned ugly when she saw the 2 rock giants charging at Shifeng. Does he need to behave this way even if he's angry? He is basically making a joke of himself in front of Silent Rain. She could understand why Silent Rain's actions would enrage Shifeng. After all, Silent Rain's demand for additional compensation because of Shifeng's presence was essentially him saying that Shifeng was dead weight. However, Shifeng's trying to prove himself by fighting 2 rock giants at once was simply foolish. After all, inside this ruin, everyone on the team had different tasks. Shifeng's main purpose lay beyond the rock guardians. At that point, once he took out his flying ship, Silent Rain would naturally shut up. Rain, let's get ready as well. This kid shouldn't be able to last long. If he dies, we'll have to start all over again, Uneducated Bull said, unsheathing the crystalline greatsword slung on his back when he saw the rock giants closing in on Shifeng. Although they had yet to reach the starting point of their quest, so long as players died here, they would be automatically resurrected outside the cave and lose 5% of their EXP. Then the team would have to suicide and leave the cave too. After all, Shifeng held the key to clearing the quest. Uneducated Bull did not wish to waste several more hours fighting through the cave system once more. No rush. This kid should be quite strong. Given how confident he is, he shouldn't have any problems lasting 4 or 5 seconds. It won't be too late for us to take action just when he is about to fall. That'll let him know his own worth and save us a lot of negotiation later, Silent Rain said as he shook his head and smiled. I guess you're right. Uneducated Bull nodded as he felt Silent Rain's words were reasonable. Every expert possessed trump cards. The rock giants might be very powerful, but Shifeng should not have much of a problem holding his ground against the Grand Lords for a few seconds. In contrast, if Silent Rain and Uneducated Bull took action too soon, they would only devalue themselves. While the 2 sea gods' direct kin were coming to an agreement, the 2 rock giants had arrived before Shifeng and were smashing their humongous fists down at him. The rock giants were 10 meters tall, and their fists were large enough to cover a 10-yard radius. Let alone a Tier 2 swordsman, even a Tier 2 assassin would not be able to dodge the rock giants' attacks in time. Meanwhile, even a small scratch from the attack of a level 101 Grand Lord could reap a large chunk of a Tier 2 MT's HP. Facing the attacks of 2 rock giants simultaneously, a Tier 2 metric tons would have to activate a life-saving skill to survive. Just when everyone assumed that Shifeng would utilize a life-saving skill to stop the 2 rock giants' attacks, He suddenly unsheathed the abyssal blade and killing ray, then lightly brandished his swords at the two descending fists. In the next moment, two deep, distinct cuts appeared on the rock giant's knuckles. At the same time, the attack trajectories of both fists suddenly changed. In the end, the fists landed roughly 10 yards away from Shifeng, creating large craters in the ground. Before the two rock giants could launch another round of attacks, Shifeng had already appeared behind their feet and executed a horizontal slash with killing ray. Void slash. 6 slashes carrying the power of the void landed on the hamstrings of the two rock giants, each slash inflicting over -800,000 damage on the Grand Lords. The powerful strength the slashes carried also forced the two rock giants to their knees, their offense coming to an abrupt halt. Silence. For a moment, as if time had frozen, silence filled the entire cavern. Whether it was Giant's Heart's members or Silent Rain and Uneducated Bull, everyone wore a dumbfounded expression. None of them could believe this scene was true. Let alone having trouble against the two rock giants, Shifeng practically got the upper hand on the Grand Lords. He had easily blocked the fists that they found extremely difficult to dodge. His attack speed was also so fast that they caught only a blurry glimpse of his blows. However, the most frightening part of his performance would still have to be the strength he displayed. Impossible. This is definitely impossible. Silent Rain blurted out his thoughts as he watched Shifeng repelling the rock giant's attacks time after time. How can a player have so much strength? The strength of Uneducated Bull, who was a sea god's direct kin and a berserker, was unrivaled in the sea god's realm, yet even he could just barely deflect the attack of one rock giant. On the other hand, Shifeng, who wasn't even a sea god's kin, was actually suppressing the two rock giants all by himself. This feat completely shattered Silent Rain's worldview. 3. White Autumn exclaimed. Although he found this unbelievable, it was also the most plausible answer he could come up with. He should be a Tier 3 Sword King. Upon hearing the words Tier 3 Sword King, unprecedented shock filled everyone's heart. Tier 2 classes were commonplace in God's domain, especially among NPCs. Only after reaching Tier 3 would one be considered a powerhouse in God's domain and receive the acknowledgement of NPCs. A Tier 3 class was one of the requirements for becoming the lord of a city. This was also the goal that players like themselves were striving toward. However, even with their current extraordinary strength, they were still not confident of completing their Tier 3 promotion quests. After all, their legacies were very special. This, in turn, meant their Tier 3 promotion quests were much more difficult than the promotion quest of ordinary players. Hence, they needed to make plenty of preparations. Nevertheless, while they were still suffering a headache over their Tier 3 promotion quests, Shifeng had actually become a Tier 3 Sword King already. Who is he? Lin Ye's heart churned with confusion as she gazed at Shifeng. She did not believe that a small guild like Zero Wing could nurture a Tier 3 powerhouse at this stage of the game. After all, none of the various superpowers had a Tier 3 powerhouse yet. Moreover, judging by Shifeng's performance, he definitely wasn't your average Tier 3 powerhouse. When she thought back to how she had tagged along with her guild's 4 peak experts to invite Shifeng in order to show him how strong Giant's Heart was, she could not help but find her actions laughable. Rain, it seems you've bitten off more than you can chew this time, Uneducated Bull said in pity. With his current combat power, even if both of us go at him together, we won't last more than 10 seconds against him. Experts of their caliber understood very clearly just how powerful a Tier 3 class was. The difference between Tier 2 and Tier 3 wasn't limited to basic attributes. Instead, the differences in physique and reaction speed were also massive. The degree of control a Tier 3 player could potentially exert on their bodies was far superior to that of a Tier 2 player. Meanwhile, Silent Rain's complexion also turned extremely ugly at this sight. He had never imagined that such a situation would occur. Originally, he had thought that he could use Shifeng as an excuse to earn a few more benefits from Giant's Heart. However, he ended up accidentally stroking the whiskers of a tiger instead. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Silent Rain was not afraid of Giant's Heart. After all, he was practically invincible in the sea god's realm. Unless Giant's Heart was willing to dispatch a large force to hunt him down, the guild could hardly do anything against him. However, that was not the case for Shifeng. Shifeng alone would be more than capable of killing him. With the help of a tracking tool, the swordsman could kill him out in the fields anytime he wanted to. Aren't you going to open the doors yet? Shifeng prompted White Autumn. He had been fighting for quite some time now, but White Autumn and the others still hadn't taken a single step toward the temple's doors. Now. We'll open them now. White Autumn snapped out of his daze after hearing Shifeng's reminder. He then hurriedly had everyone else on the team move to open the temple's tightly shut doors. Due to Shifeng's presence, White Autumn and the others had no problem opening the temple doors. They did not have to worry about the rock giant's attacks at all and could focus fully on removing the door's seal. In the end, they took only 25 seconds to open the temple doors completely. After seeing White Autumn and the others enter the temple, Shifeng executed Void Slash and sent the two rock giants stumbling back. He then dashed straight for the temple's entrance and disappeared from the dimly lit cavern. Chapter 2341, Mutated Mythic. The moment Shifeng entered the temple, he felt as if he had arrived in an entirely different world. Instead of a ceiling, a blue sky hung overhead. Before him was a vast expanse of flowers. Just standing in this place gave him an indescribably pleasant and refreshed feeling. However, some distance ahead stood countless gravestones and statues. Each gravestone recorded the deeds of its owner when they were still among the living. A closer inspection of these gravestones would reveal that every grave belonged to someone who was once a powerhouse in God's domain. Many of these gravestones even belonged to heroes. Meanwhile, every one of these powerhouses had something in common: the fact that they all died on the same day. A resting place constructed by the sea god? Shifeng could sense faint divine might coming from the gravestones and statues before him. If these things weren't constructed by a god, then it would be impossible for them to pick up a god's aura. After all, an item needed to be in contact with a god for an extended period to absorb the god's aura. Just a graze would not be sufficient. During the time Shifeng was observing his surroundings, White Autumn and the others approached him. Elder Yifeng, your guild really has hidden its strength deeply. If Warblood and Starlink find out about this, they'll most likely receive a fright, White Autumn said in admiration as he looked at Shifeng. Although White Autumn had long known that Shifeng possessed extraordinary strength, he never thought that Shifeng was this strong. The fact that Shifeng advanced to a Tier 3 Sword King so soon would serve as a huge deterrence to the various superpowers. After all, nobody could guarantee that should Zero Wing get pushed into a corner, Shifeng would not invest a large amount of time specifically to make trouble and target the upper echelons and core experts of Zero Wing's enemies. Most likely, only be a few players in God's domain could say with confidence that they could survive against a Tier 3 Sword King. Moreover, Zero Wing also had a flying ship and occupied a medium fortress on Dragonheart Island. After remembering these matters, White Autumn could not help but grow interested in the guild known as Zero Wing. Now, rather than viewing Zero Wing as a pseudo-superpower, White Autumn already considered Zero Wing an existence equal to Giant's Heart. As for Linya, although she was a little in awe of Shifeng's strength, she still could not help gnashing her teeth in anger and frustration, as she felt that Shifeng had just been toying with her. Despite being a Tier 3 powerhouse, Shifeng was insistent on hiding his strength. It would have been fine if he simply kept hiding his strength, yet he chose to reveal it midway through their quest. She felt as if the swordsman had been playing her for a fool. However, as luck would have it, she was utterly helpless to do anything against him. What Linya did not know was that, if not for the extreme importance of ocean boundary stones to Zero Wing, Shifeng wouldn't have bothered interfering at all. After all, it was much easier to just relax at the rear and collect his payment of ocean boundary stones once the quest was done. However, he had received an opportunity to earn 2 ocean boundary stones with merely a little effort. With the value of 2 ocean boundary stones equivalent to 1 piece of level 100 plus epic equipment, only a fool would choose not to make such a trade. Brother Yifeng, you really concealed your strength perfectly. It is my loss this time. According to our agreement, I'll give you the 2 ocean boundary stones White Autumn promised me as well, Silent Rain said, admitting his defeat. Nobody present found Silent Rain's decision surprising. Although Silent Rain was a sea god's direct kin and could exert the combat power of a Tier 3 class in the sea god's realm, there were still massive differences between Tier 3s. Silent Rain might be able to cope against ordinary Tier 3 experts, but against a Tier 3 Sword King like Shifeng, who could suppress 2 level 101 Grandlords all by himself, he would be nothing but a joke. Unless Silent Rain successfully advanced to Tier 3 as well, he wouldn't perform any better than other Tier 2 players when fighting Shifeng. However, completing the Tier 3 promotion quest was easier said than done. Even if Silent Rain could get promoted to Tier 3, that was something that would happen only in the distant future. Meanwhile, Shifeng did not say anything about this situation. Gaining 2 additional ocean barrier stones was undoubtedly a good thing for him. With this, his single trip here would earn him a total of 9 ocean barrier stones. This was definitely a huge windfall for Zero Wing. After all, compared to other powers, Zero Wing already possessed a significant advantage when it came to learning combat techniques. The Extraordinary Tower. The further one progressed into the Realms of Truth, the greater the assistance the Realms of Truth would provide. Upon reaching the Ascension Realm, even a Flowing Water Realm expert would have an excellent chance of learning bronze combat techniques. Even if their mastery wouldn't be very high, they would at least learn the basic principles of how bronze combat techniques improved one's combat power. Meanwhile, with the help of the Ocean Boundary Stones, Zero Wing would be able to nurture a batch of experts with mastery over bronze combat techniques. At that time, Zero Wing could further stabilize the situation of its various branch guilds. Vice Guild Leader White, may I know what we will be doing next? Shifeng asked as he looked at the sea of flowers around him. What we need to do next is very simple. We just have to get rid of the spirits created by the strange energy leaking out of the graves. The quicker we clear out all of these spirits, the higher our quest completion rate will be. During our previous 2 attempts, we spent nearly 3 days clearing out the spirits. Now that we have your help, we should be able to finish this part much more quickly, White Autumn said, smiling as he pointed at the faint crimson mist seeping out of the graves. The spirits created by the strange energy were roughly equal in strength to the Naga Sirens. However, unlike the Nagas, these spirits were limited in number. One could say that upon entering this world, they had completed a large portion of the quest already. After eliminating the spirits, all that would be left was removing the strange energy from the graves. Once that was done, not only would White Autumn be able to become a sea god's direct kin, but he would also obtain a sea god's weapon, which would allow him to become the ruler of the seas. While White Autumn was speaking, the strange energy seeping from the graves condensed. A short moment later, translucent undying spirits took shape above the numerous graves. These undying spirits were all geared in excellent weapons and equipment. Their eyes gave off a black glow, and their bodies radiated an indescribably strange energy, which continuously corroded the space around them as if these spirits were trying to taint the space in their own colors. Undying Spirit. Special Energy Being Great Lord. Level 99 HP 50, 000, 000/50, 000, 000. Although these immortal spirits looked to be only ordinary Great Lords, Shifeng could tell that their combat standards were superior to the Naga Sirens, probably reaching the 6th floor Trial Tower standard. Even Refinement Realm experts of the same level would not be a match for them with their powerful basic attributes. However, against experts like White Autumn and the others on the team, these undying spirits could hardly count as an opponent. Not to mention Shifeng was also taking part in the fight now. Due to Shifeng's participation, the task that originally required nearly 3 days to complete was done in just roughly 2 days. If not for the undying spirit's very low spawn rate, the team would have finished this part of the quest in just 1.5 days. Meanwhile, during these 2 days, almost everyone in the team had received a lot of EXP. White Autumn, Linya, Silent Rain and Uneducated Bull had all risen to level 98. As for Shifeng, due to the monster's lower level, he did not receive that much EXP from them. As a result, he was still 23% away from reaching level 103. Aside from EXP, the undying spirits had also dropped relatively excellent equipment. Even though the drop rate wasn't particularly high, White Autumn had still ended up with over 100 pieces of level 95 secret silver equipment and several pieces of level 95 fine gold equipment. In addition, he had also obtained quite a number of precious materials. After clearing out the undying spirits, White Autumn had everyone sit down and rest in preparation for the final phase of the quest. Once everyone was rested, he took out an aqua blue pendant and chanted an incantation before the graveyard. Immediately, the strange energy remaining in the graveyard went berserk and started gathering rapidly at the center of the graveyard. After 10 seconds, a 6-meter-tall undying spirit appeared before everyone's eyes, wearing a crimson cape made out of the strange energy. At this moment, This undying spirit was looking at the players before it with an evil grin on its face. Upon seeing this undying spirit, whether it was White Autumn or Silent Rain and the others, the expression on their faces changed immediately. That's not right. Why is this boss different from the ones we fought before? Linya could not help her confusion as she stared at the undying spirit. Sunset King. Mutant Mythic. Level 100 HP 2 700 000/2 700 000. Is this Sunset King really the same as the ones we fought before? Silent Rain's complexion darkened as he felt the aura the Sunset King radiated. Its HP is more than triple of the previous ones. Although the two Sunset Kings they fought before were similarly mythic monsters, they had not been strong enough to make his scalp tingle. The intensity of the current Sunset King's aura was at least twice as strong as the previous ones. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Damn it. Why is it a mutant? White Autumn's complexion paled when he saw the Sunset King. He was very familiar with the existence of mutants, as he had come across one in the Sea God's realm before. The mutant back then was only a level 60 Grand Lord. However, its strength surpassed even that of mythic monsters of the same level. It had easily slaughtered a raid team consisting of several thousand level 70+ experts. In order to bring down that level 60+ mutant, Giant's Heart had mobilized its war weapons and sacrificed nearly 10,000 expert players. Meanwhile, the mutant before him now was a level 100 mythic monster. White Autumn didn't dare imagine what would happen to the Sea God's realm if it managed to leave this place. Run. Everyone escape quickly. White Autumn shouted. This isn't a monster we can handle. We need to escape this place immediately. Chapter 2342 Void Fragmentation. None of the team members doubted White Autumn's judgment, and Linya immediately retrieved a Tier 3 group instantaneous transfer scroll, activating it. She almost moved faster than she ever had in her entire life. A level 100 mythic monster was already a handful, even for sea gods kin like themselves. They had Shifeng's help, but that might not be enough to take one day. Needless to say, they had no hope of surviving against a mythic-ranked mutant. The last time a mutant had appeared in the Sea God's realm, it had badly shaken the entire world. For that battle, Giant's Heart had unified the forces across the Sea God's realm, losing over 10,000 lives and blowing through nearly half of its resources. The guild had even been forced to rely on certain cards it had prepared to use against super guilds to bring down the mutant. To make matters worse, a mutant didn't just kill players as normal monsters did. It would sometimes devour them as well. Players that were simply killed didn't have much of an issue, but those that were captured and eaten would suffer triple the usual death penalty, and their souls would be weakened for 10 days after their resurrection. Being eaten was far more severe a loss than dying 5 or 6 times. During the battle against the mutant, many of Giant's Heart's refinement realm experts and stronger had been devoured. Unfortunately, that included some peak experts. It had been a huge setback for the guild. If not for that battle, Pride Empire wouldn't have defended against Giant's Hear's invasion in the Fire Dragon Empire so effectively. Meanwhile, not only was the mutant before them a mythic-ranked monster, but it was also level 100. If they couldn't escape in time and the monster devoured them, the consequences would be unimaginably dire for experts of their caliber. Fortunately, players could use teleportation tools within this divine temple. Otherwise, they'd have no hope. As soon as Linya activated the scroll, a teleportation array appeared under the team members' feet. As a Tier 3 group instantaneous teleportation scroll, it could instantly teleport up to 20 players to the nearest NPC city or a fixed location. She didn't waste a second deciding on the teleport location, setting the scroll to transport them to the nearest NPC city. Shifeng didn't object to White Autumn's decision to retreat in the least. Even with his long years of experience in God's domain, this was the first time Shifeng had encountered or heard of a mythic-ranked mutant. By becoming a mutant, a monster would be akin to a fearsome beast released from its cage. Its basic attributes would undergo a qualitative transformation, and its intellect would substantially increase. At this point, Shifeng couldn't even fathom how powerful the mutated Sunset King had become. He was certain that if he chose to stay, he'd lose his life. Mythic-ranked mutant. By becoming a mutant, a monster would be akin to a fearsome beast released from its cage. Its basic attributes would undergo a qualitative transformation, and its intellect would substantially increase. At this point, Shifeng couldn't even fathom how powerful the mutated Sunset King had become. He was certain that if he chose to stay, he'd lose his life. We're finally safe. Linya breathed a sigh of relief when she saw the countless players wandering the street around them. The rest of the team members nodded in agreement. Had they lingered in that temple for a few more seconds, the mutated Sunset King would have slaughtered them. Now that they were in Lake Mountain City, they were safe. Lake Mountain City wasn't a capital city, but it was a major NPC city that was extremely far away from the ruin they had been exploring. Even if the Sunset King wanted to target them, it shouldn't be able to do so. Only White Autumn was disappointed with the outcome. He had gone to great lengths to complete that quest, and just when he had been a step away from his promotion to direct kin and the sea god's weapon, his efforts were wasted. It seems I troubled you for nothing, Elder Yi Feng. I hadn't expected these results. However, I will still pay for your time with 3 ocean barrier stones. I hope that you can accept them, White Autumn apologized. Although he had failed the quest, White Autumn saw the merit in befriending Shifeng after the swordsman's display in the cavern. It wasn't certain that Giant's Heart wouldn't encounter another quest that would require such an expert's assistance in the future. After all, Shifeng had completed his Tier 3 promotion quest far sooner than anyone in God's domain. Even if Giant's Heart's experts reached Tier 3 as well, Shifeng's strength shouldn't be underestimated with the massive lead he had. Silent Rain and Uneducated Bull watched Shifeng enviously. According to their agreement with White Autumn, they'd only get paid if they helped complete the quest. Since they hadn't, they'd receive nothing, yet Shifeng had still been given 3 ocean barrier stones. The original agreement they had with Giant's Heart had only involved a single ocean barrier stone as payment. As Shifeng was about to respond to White Autumn's offer, however, an intense shockwave blew through the street, attracting everyone's attention. Some distance away from Shifeng's group, a tear in space opened, and 2 pitch-black hands reached out, slowly prying the tear apart. How is this possible? Linya exclaimed as she watched the black hands emerge. Those hands belonged to none other than the Sunset King. The crimson aura radiating off the crimson hands was the same strange energy that filled the sea god's ruin they had been in. The others on the team stared at the rift as well, just as shocked. This was a monster that could track their teleportation and rip through space to hunt them down. It was the first time they had ever heard of such a creature in God's domain. Before Shifeng and the others could react, the Sunset King stepped through the enlarged spatial tear, its crimson gaze immediately locking on to the group. When it saw Shifeng and his companions, it gave them a sinister grin as if ridiculing Shifeng and the others for thinking they had any hope of escaping it. Void Fragmentation. A mythic-ranked mutant is actually this powerful? Shifeng was utterly astonished. Normally, not even Tier 4 NPCs could track players when they fled by teleporting, yet this mutated Sunset King was exactly that powerful, forcing open a path that led directly to its prey. To accomplish such a feat, the Sunset King would need to have the strength to fragment space itself. Normally, only Tier 5 or Tier 6 NPCs would have such power. Contrary to Shifeng and his companions' reactions, the players around them seemed excited as they watched the Sunset King emerge. Crap. A mythic monster is sieging the city? This is perfect timing. A level 100 mythic monster. If it dies, it'll definitely drop something excellent. If I can snatch 1 or 2 items, I'll be rich. Lake Mountain City's players didn't panic in the least when they saw the Sunset King. Rather, they hungered for its blood. They were in an NPC city after all, and the city's NPC soldiers were all level 150 or higher. A measly level 100 mythic monster would just be asking for a beating by trying to attack the city. It wasn't long after the Sunset King's appearance that a group of level 150+ NPC soldiers arrived and charged toward it. As the soldiers approached, however, the Sunset King removed a strange crimson scythe from its back. It then brandished the weapon. Crimson blades flew from the scythe surrounding the Sunset King. The instant these crimson blades slammed into the NPC soldiers, the NPCs flew through the air heavily injured. Even the buildings lining the street, which were protected by magic arrays, turned into rubble as the attacks sliced through them. Every player within 100 yards of the mutated Sunset King died without even leaving behind their ashes. It was as if they had evaporated instantly. Finally, the city's players realized how afraid they should be of the Sunset King. Are you kidding me? Magic arrays had protected those buildings. Even mythic monsters would need a lot of time to destroy them, yet this monster. The players that had assumed they could take advantage of the Sunset King's arrival were dumbfounded. With a single skill, the mutated mythic monster had heavily injured several dozen level 150+ Tier 2 NPCs and flattened the street's buildings. This was the first time any of them had seen such power. White Autumn and his team could only gasp as they watched. How was this a mythic monster? The Sunset King was practically a natural disaster. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. After repelling the NPC soldiers, the Sunset King returned its attention to Shifeng's group. It walked toward them and every step it took increased the pressure they felt. For a moment, they all felt as if they were standing before the Grim Reaper himself. Although the process had seemed drawn out, the Sunset King had crossed the distance between it and Shifeng's group in an instant. In fact, Shifeng hadn't even had time to react to the monster's approach. Suddenly, however, a blue-haired man in silver armor and wielding an icy blue two-handed axe appeared, interrupting the Sunset King when it was still 50 yards from Shifeng and about to swing its scythe again. The instant this middle-aged, blue-haired man appeared, the nearby players breathed a sigh of relief. This man was none other than Lake Mountain City's magistrate, Westland, a level 180 Tier 4 Heavenly Knight. Chapter 2343, Inferior Legendary Event. Even White Autumn and his guildmates released a relieved sigh when they spotted Westland. Westland was a level 180 Tier 4 Heavenly Knight. Even if the Sunset King were immune to level suppression, Westland wouldn't be thrown as easily as the level 150+ Tier 2 NPC soldiers. Furthermore, Lake Mountain City's magic array strengthened Westland in battle. However, the Sunset King remained unperturbed. It released even more intense energy from its scythe, energy so powerful that space around it began to crumble. At the same time, the power of the Sunset King's aura skyrocketed. What's going on? How has it become even stronger? Silent Rain stared at the crimson energy around the mutant's weapon in astonishment. The Sunset King had already displayed unbelievable power, yet it continued to grow stronger. It almost seemed like some seal had been removed. As the aura washed over him, Silent Rain even struggled to move. How is it growing so quickly? The situation confused Shifeng as well. As monsters completed a mutation, they would experience a qualitative leap to their strength, which would grow until it couldn't be quantified by levels. As mutants killed other creatures, they would continue to grow stronger. But Shifeng had never heard of a mutant that could power up twice in such a short time. The Sunset King swung its scythe again before White Autumn or his comrades could react. As a result, the space before them turned a deep crimson. Is this really a mythic monster? The distant spectators were utterly dumbfounded. With just a swing of its scythe, the Sunset King had saturated the space before it with crimson energy, which vaporized everything in its path, distorting space itself. As the crimson energy extended toward Westland, the Heavenly Knight raised his icy blue axe and yanked it down in a deadly arc Tier 4 skill, Heavenly Flash. Several dozen arcs of blue light flew toward the approaching crimson energy. As the attacks collided, they created a fierce shockwave that forced White Autumn and his team to stumble back. With it came a loud boom that echoed throughout the city. As the dust settled, it revealed that the Sunset King had only stumbled a few steps backward. Even after taking Westland's attack, the Sunset King maintained its calm gaze as it stared down the Tier 4 NPC. The mythic mutant hadn't sustained a single injury. Impossible. Is that really a monster? Even a level 180 Tier 4 NPC was only able to shove it back a little. The spectating players gaped in shock. They couldn't rationalize how a level 100 mythic monster had the strength to rival a level 180 Tier 4 NPC. While the nearby players were dazed, the Sunset King raised its scythe and bellowed. A bloody mist then manifested, spreading out around it. Easily tens of thousands of level 100+ undying spirits began to emerge from the mist. Even the weakest summoned undying spirit was a High Lord, while the strongest were Grand Lords. As these undying spirits appeared, Lake Mountain City's players heard the sound of a system notification. System: Lake Mountain City has triggered the Inferior Legendary Event, Awakening of the Mutant King. Kill the Sunset King before it destroys Lake Mountain City and obtain the Mutated Heart. With the Mutated Heart, one may receive the Sea God's blessing. The notification shocked everyone, and the players who had been trying to flee froze in place. An inferior legendary event. They had never heard of such a thing happening in the Sea God's realm before. Moreover, if they killed the Sunset King, they could receive the Sea God's blessing. A god's blessing. That was even better than becoming a god's kin. If they could obtain the Sea God's blessing, an instant rise to fame would be easy. The way these players looked at the Sunset King immediately changed. Rather than fear and trepidation, they now stared at the mythic mutant with longing, fervent gazes. Our adventurer team must obtain that mutated heart. With it, we'll become famous throughout the Sea God's realm. Gather all of our war weapons immediately. We need to kill the Sunset King before other guilds arrive. Lake Mountain City's various major powers exploded into action. These major powers hadn't paid much attention to the Sunset King at first. A mythic monster's loot wasn't all that impressive after all. Even if they killed it, they'd be lucky to claim a handful of items with how many players were in the area. Furthermore, the Sunset King was clearly quite powerful. The potential gains simply hadn't been worth the losses. However, the system announcement had changed everything. As long as they killed the Sunset King and obtained its mutated heart, they could grant one player the Sea God's blessing. With it, one would be unmatched at sea. We should gather our men as well, Vice Guild Leader. With a Tier 4 NPC and an entire city of players to help raid the Sunset King, not even this mythic mutant will last long, Linya quickly advised. Before the planar passages had opened, no one would have dared to defy Giant's Heart in the Sea God's realm, but now many of the other world's major powers had allied with those on the main continent. Although Giant's Heart still held a significant portion of the Sea God's realm's resources, the various major powers didn't fear the guild as they once did. Hence, it was impossible to claim all of the Sunset King's loot. Notify our subordinates and tell them to send as many guild members to the city as they can. Inform them that we'll need all of our available war weapons as well, White Autumn commanded, understanding the situation's importance as well. Giant's Heart might have a powerful hold on the Sea God's realm, but that did not mean its strength was equally distributed across the world. Logically, it shouldn't have much more manpower than the local guilds in a backwater area like Lake Mountain City. Moreover, that strange bloody mist had disabled all teleportation abilities. In other words, players would have to run to Lake Mountain City. This gave Giant's Heart even less of an advantage over the local powers. Meanwhile, Silent Rain and Uneducated Bull also began to grow anxious. Due to the Sunset King's power, players couldn't approach it. If they tried, they'd be instantly vaporized. Hence, the city's players would have to rely on tools and war weapons to raid the mythic mutant, which was a major disadvantage to independent players like them. Following which, Lake Mountain City's various major powers mobilized one trump card after another, with some using summoning scrolls, and others revealing formidable war weapons such as gnome cannons. These powers started to push back the undying army while bombarding the Sunset King. For a while, Lake Mountain City had transformed into a chaotic war zone. However, the Sunset King was no easy opponent. Not only was its attack range massive, but its summoned undying spirits also moved like a well-organized army. They specifically targeted the gnome cannons and large ballistas, forcing the various major powers to defend their war weapons desperately. Unfortunately, against the level 100+ undying spirits, ordinary Tier 2 experts were little more than moving targets. After only 20 minutes, over 100,000 players had died in Lake Mountain City. Several hundred Tier 2 NPC soldiers had also fallen amidst the chaos. In contrast, as the bloody mist continued to expand, more undying spirits joined the battlefield. Even though more players and powers joined the fight with each passing minute, they couldn't stop the spread of the bloody mist. Fortunately, bombarded by the various major powers' war weapons and magic scrolls, the Sunset King rapidly lost HP. At this rate, Vice Guild Leader, I'm afraid that the raid will end before our reinforcements arrive. Also, there are too many spirits here now. Approaching the boss's location will be very difficult, Linya worriedly reported as she watched the mythic monster's HP decrease. Even in Lake Mountain City, Giant's Heart had a considerable amount of manpower, but it didn't have as many war weapons and tools as the local powers. If their reinforcements didn't get to the battle soon, Giant's Heart's members wouldn't be able to reach the Sunset King's loot until after the other powers. White Autumn was just as anxious about the situation, but he didn't have a solution. Without being able to teleport, mobilizing their war weapons and tools would take a very long time. Vice Guild Leader White, I have a suggestion that may help us secure the Sunset King's kill, Shifeng suddenly offered. In exchange, however, I want everything the mutant drops aside from the mutated heart. Are you interested? You have a plan? White Autumn asked. The rest of the team turned to stare at Shifeng, confused. Linya was particularly confuddled, with no idea how Shifeng intended to kill the Sunset King and claim its mutated heart. The Sunset King was surrounded by a swarm of undying spirits, and the Grand Lord-ranked undying spirits could even fly. Even with a flying ship, getting close to the mythic mutant would be impossible without being attacked. They would need a large number of war weapons to protect the flying ship. A flying ship wasn't particularly useful against monsters to begin with. Its offensive abilities were mainly a deterrence for other players. The vessel would be a sitting duck against a group of monsters. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You of course, Shifeng said, nodding confidently. Deal. If you can get me the mutated heart, I'll give you the rest. White Autumn agreed. He wasn't particularly interested in the Sunset King's other items anyway. If Shifeng was confident of killing the Sunset King, it was only good news for him. May I know what the plan is, Elder Yifeng? Do everything you can to protect my flying ship, and I'll need 8 experts to man the ship's cannons. You can leave the rest to me, Shifeng said. After hearing the plan, Linya couldn't help but roll her eyes. If they had enough war weapons to keep the undying spirits off of the Crimson Dragon flying ship, then they wouldn't have to worry about missing out on the Sunset King's loot in the first place. Oh, I'll also need 6 peak experts to pilot these guardian puppets and protect the flying ship, Shifeng said, chuckling. He then revealed 6 guardian puppets from his epic spatial bag.